Okay, it's 8:30, so YouTube should be coming live. Okay, so Becky says it's live. Becky Anchor says it's live. She can see the agenda. So this is Leah Voorhees. Can everybody hear me? We're going to give people a couple minutes to get up and running and before we begin. But welcome to our spring USEAM meeting. We're really excited to be able to share some information with you today, and I've got the agenda on the screen so you can see where we're headed, and we're just going to give it probably 2 more minutes before we actually begin and let people get their computers up and running. So thank you for joining us. Good morning. For those of you that are just joining us, this is Leah Voorhees. We're excited to have you. We're going to give people about 2 more minutes to get all situated, and then we will begin our agenda. So if you can see the agenda, great. And if you can hear me, we will begin in 2. Good morning, everybody. This is Leah Voorhees. You just joined us in the last minute or so. Welcome to our UC meeting. Hopefully you can see the agenda on our screen and can hear me. And we are excited to present some information to you, to share a couple hours with you, and wish we could all be together so we could see you and we could have a usual interactive meeting, but this will be a really good opportunity for us to at least share some information. And you can give me feedback or ask questions by emailing my assistant, Brian Christensen. It's Brian with a Y, and Christensen is S-E-N. His email address is in the email that I sent you yesterday. If you have questions about anything we talk about today, please email Brian Christensen at schools.utah.gov. He's going to keep all the emails, put them together in themes of questions, and then we'll be able to respond to all of you based on the questions that we get. So if you have questions anytime during the presentation, just email Brian, or if in the next day or 2 you have questions that come up while you're thinking about what we talked about today, just send Brian .Christensen at schools.utah.gov, Brian with a Y, Christensen with an S-E-N, and send him your question. He'll compile them all, and next week we'll send out an email that for all of you that responds to the frequently asked questions, if there are any, and maybe there won't be any, but we really want to be able to respond to you as quickly and as easily as possible. So welcome to our unprecedented, exciting YouTube Special Education Administrators meeting this morning. We're broadcasting from clear across the state. So we have Marcy Elliott will be talking to us in a minute from Logan, and Kim Fratto and Jenny Slade are in St. George. And the rest of us are around the Wasatch Front. So we have an entire statewide broadcast for you this morning. So a couple things to start with. You can see on the agenda that we have a couple staff updates. That's usually how we begin our UC meetings. So we're really excited that Laura Lee Gillespie has just accepted the position of UPIPS coordinator to replace Jennifer Slade when she retires this summer. So we had a really great applicant pool. I want to thank any of you who applied. We were really excited about the interest in the position, and we're excited to have Laura Lee take that position. Also, Carol Riddell left us last week to take an important position at the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. And so Kathy Webb from our agency from downstairs in Teaching and Learning, she's the licensing specialist in teaching and learning, is going to come upstairs to special education and take Carol Riddell's position as the licensing specialist for special ed. So we're pretty excited about that. Most of you probably know Kathy already because she's been doing the ARLs for special education for several years. And then we're also really excited. We lost Malia Height, who was our middle school mathematics specialist, because she became the new licensing coordinator at the USBE when Travis Rawlings went to Granite School District a few weeks ago. So Jolie Honey, who was the STEM coordinator at USBE for the last few years, has decided to reduce the amount of time she works. She just had a new grandbaby, and she's going to be coming to our section to be the mathematics equity specialist, and we're really excited about that. So we have three new staff members that if you don't already know, you'll get to know once we're able to get back together again. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to turn a couple minutes over to Marcy Elliott in the Logan City School District to share a bright spot about remote learning. And Marcy told me about this last week or 2 weeks ago, and I thought it was such a great example of teachers being creative in this very complicated situation. So Marcy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so about a week or 10 days into this adventure, I sent out an email to my staff with information that was pretty long. And at the end of it, I put something about, share a celebration or a bright spot. That'll also let me know you read the whole email. Got a really cute email back from a teacher who's actually a USU intern. I'm going to just read the little part of it. She says, one celebration. One student's mom responded back to me one day saying this dismissal has been extremely hard for him. He was swearing and hitting his mom and therapist. We discussed some ideas to help him. We decided to create a behavior tracker like we use in the classroom to follow their soft schedule at home. Breakfast, school at home, reading, lunch, therapy, etc. I sent her a video of me talking to him, explaining that he still needs to be respectful, responsible, and involved at home. I sent home a chart for him to write his daily points on his tracker for each week during the dismissal period. I also told him that if he had a perfect day that he can play with the classroom magnet tiles. I dropped off the magnet tiles, more supplemental work, behavior tracker, and weekly points yesterday. His mom said that he has had a complete 180 turnaround. She texted me back and said, "You are the best. I can't stress enough how much I appreciate you. I've been more stressed than ever this last week, and you have made it better. I'm glad that what I am doing is helping out not only the student, but his mom and his brother survive this once in a lifetime thing." So it's just fun to see the creativity that our teachers are coming up with. So that's my celebration.
Thank you so much, Marcy. I just want to tell you how many cool, similar stories that I have heard from all of you across the state. And I know you also have shared really frustrating and difficult stories, but just want to highlight the fact that there are really good things happening across the state. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. So
You're welcome.
we also have Esperanza Reyes from the Utah Parent Center that's going to share with us. The Parent Center is such a wonderful partner, and they've been a fantastic partner the last 6 weeks while we've been home as well. I've been talking frequently to Joey Hanna, the director of the Parent Center, and we've been keeping each other updated on what the concerns are that are coming into our office and to their office. And so Esperanza is going to share a couple of the things that the Parent Center has been hearing from parents since the email I sent you about, it was about 4 weeks ago with some updates. So Esperanza.
Thank you, Leah, and good morning, everyone. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share these concerns directly with you. So we appreciate that, and we also truly value the partnership we have with the Utah State Board of Education and the communication that Leah and Joey, our executive director, have had continuously during this difficult time. Some of the things that we have heard recently from families is that they're really at a loss when it comes to compensatory services and what that may look like in the future. And we believe that maybe outlining a process for what those may look like would help families not be as confused about the possibility of receiving those, what to keep track of during this time, and what to expect when students are back. We've had questions around this topic. We also want to talk to you about continuing efforts to reach out to families that have seemingly disconnected from remote education. I know that many LEAs and many families are worried that others have disconnected pretty much completely from this and there isn't any activity going on. So don't falter in your efforts to continue to reach out to these families. If a family speaks another language, for example, making sure that they're receiving information in that language whenever it's feasible. If a family is technology limited, having hard copies mailed to families regarding major school announcements and procedures, and not necessarily just relying on email or school websites, including social media as a means of communication. We know that sometimes families are not necessarily going to answer a phone call, for example, if they don't recognize the number and have never saved it on their phones. So sometimes texting families before you even send out that phone call, if you're not having success in getting them to answer, might increase your chances and your probabilities of having them answer them. Trying to organize the times that students are expected to join in activities. Some families are expressing a bit of frustration in receiving time-sensitive information when there's, for example, a live session being planned for their student, where they don't feel like they have enough notice to pre-plan for them and end up missing out without necessarily wanting to or meaning to. So it just makes it a little bit hard for families to keep up and pre-plan ahead of time for their child if they are receiving those announcements the day of, for example. So that's just something to keep in mind. And making sure that the communication lines are open so that parents and students can ask questions about content. Various families have called our center and asked about understanding content and receiving more information about the assignments that their child has been assigned in different classes. So being open to phone calls or individual question and answer sessions with a student or parent could help everyone move forward with assignments that they are struggling with. And these are just some general things we're hearing since the last time that I know Leah communicated what we had heard from parents before. So we really appreciate the time to share this. And we do know that there are some incredible things happening out there in all LEAs throughout the state. And we have heard some fabulous things as well. So we thank you for your efforts. And we know this is completely unprecedented and it requires patience from everyone on both ends. And we try to communicate that to our families as we work with them.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. Thank you for your partnership. Please let everyone at the Parent Center know how much we appreciate everything that all of you are doing. So thank you very much. Okay, we're really excited now. Usually, hey everybody. Yes, broadcasting from my closet. That's what it's come to. You can see all my jeans on one side, my ironing on the other. That's how I can get quiet at my house. So in the closet. We are really excited. Usually in our April UC meeting, we have a legislative overview, what happened in the session, and we're going to do that again. Next, we have Jeff Van Holten, who was here with us in February to talk about what was happening in the legislature, to talk about what happened. And of course, the legislature is still meeting. They met last week and they're meeting again today. And so he's got an update for us, and then we'll have more updates as the legislature continues through the special sessions that they're working on now. So we're really grateful for Jeff spending some time with us again, and we will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Leah. Camera. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I am going to share my screen here. And here we go. Hopefully that is working. I am going to pull up a few things on my screen so I can see the chat box. Okay. I am now geared up and ready to go. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Van Holten. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the board. I'm part of that job. I get to do all the fun stuff of policy work and dealing with the legislature, as well as working with board members on administrative rules. I'm very happy to be with you today on time. Last time, as you may recall, I forgot what day it was, and I was on the Hill during the session when I should have been with all of you. And you were very quick to move things around so I could get to you in time. I'm happy that I could be here on time today. I wanted to go ahead and just start out by what I'm calling a brain break. We'll have a few of these, but I wanted to know, and this is more to test the chat feature. So if you look over to your right, where you see all of the participants, and down at the bottom, there should be the word chat. And you might have a little arrow that's facing sideways or facing down. Click on the arrow to make sure the chat expands. And you can type in your answers there. You'll also know that there's a to box with a drop-down menu. It should say to everyone right now. You could also private chat each other if you wanted. If I put you to sleep and you're just like, wow, I really don't want to listen. You can have a chat conversation on the side. Make sure you've changed it to the person you want to talk to so that you're not sending messages about how boring I am to me. Although I will accept all criticism. So with that in mind, I'm a little soft. Okay, I'll scoot closer as well and talk a little louder. I tend to be a soft speaker, so I apologize. Is this better, Leah? And Leah said that to me privately, so she already is well aware. Like, perfect.
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
Yep. So first question for you all to kind of test out the chat feature. In the chat box, if you could answer this question, what phrase of 3 words or less has been describing your experience telecommuting? Oh, you're streaming through YouTube. Thank you, Kim. I did not realize that. So you cannot chat with me because you are not on in the WebEx. That makes more sense. Okay, yes. So when we do these brain breaks, I will just ask you to think to yourself what these answers are. Although some of the people who are in the WebEx, the staff members, I would love for you to give some answers that I can shout out to people who are watching this through YouTube. That would also explain why the participant list was so low. I'm like, wow, there were so many more people the last time I was there. You're all on YouTube. Okay, that makes more sense. I apologize. There is no chat feature for you. But you can send a text to Leah if you want and have her number. I will move on. So, education bills by the numbers. Oh, and Leah said her telecommuting experience has been closet, quiet, tons of emails. Emily is saying it's been lovely. Um, I'd agree with both of you, although I'm typically not in this office. I am usually downstairs in the living room. I've set up a table in front of the bay window so I can actually get sunlight and watch the regular activities in the neighborhood. I've gotten to know a lot of the dogs that are getting walked on a daily basis now. Tracy Gooley, I almost said Goobler, homeschool, homework, balance. Yes, and I will say I don't have children of my own, but I do have a nephew and two nieces, fourth grade, second grade, kindergarten. And my sister and brother-in-law are both essential workers. So on Monday and Wednesday, it is Uncle homeschool here. And yesterday, I reached that point where I was like, I don't know how parents do this every day. 2 days a week is rough while trying to work on top of it. Took a long bath last night. But we got our work done and we're getting a PowerPoint of President Nixon up and running for tomorrow's Zoom meeting. Anyway, I digress. So education bills by the numbers. I'm going to go through the 2020 general session a little bit up front, and then we're going to pause and talk a little bit about the special sessions, and then I'll run through the legislation that passed. This presentation, I could make it go 5 hours, I can make it go 10 minutes, depending on how much time we want to spend on each item. So I'll count on staff in the chat. If you're like, hey Jeff, cool story, but this bill is not relevant, just let me know and I'll like move forward. So first, education bill by the numbers. Typically the passage rate for education, well, for bills generally, is around 33 to 36%. Angie Stallings and I have been having debates over that number, but I will go with my number. That is the general passage rate. So we had about 510 bills total out of the session pass, education or not education. And that was out of almost 16 or 1700 bills that were written and ready to go through the process. So out of those 15 to 1600 bills, 198 of them we were tracking because they were related to education on some level, and 112 of them passed. That is a 56% passage rate for education bills, which was much higher than the typical around 30 to 33% passage rate that every other bill had a chance of during this session. So we count that as a big win. A lot of that was because we were proactive from the state board side and seeking tweaks and changes to programs that we currently have. The legislature always appreciates the ability to work with stakeholders over the course of the interim. So from the month of May to December, you can begin working with legislators. They can start opening and writing bills May 13th or 14th this year. So there is the opportunity to work far in advance of the January start time for a legislative session to get bills going. So we decided to take that proactive approach, and we had a lot of bills. Actually, all of our bills that we requested except one passed, and the one that didn't pass was number 7 to be heard on the Senate floor when the clock struck midnight. So it was working its way up, it just ran out of time. So that was a really good success rate and good year for us. So proactive work is definitely the approach when you want to get some legislative changes going. So some of the numbers to run through really quick. And again, big caveat for everyone out there. This is assuming that what happened in the 2020 session would remain in a normal year. And we are not in a normal year right now due to the COVID-19 situation. We are in limbo in terms of what will the reality actually look like down the road. So time will tell. We'll just have to wait and see what the current situation does to our funding request. But with that in mind, currently we received $403 million in new funding. As far as we can tell, that is a record. To give some perspective, typically that number in the last couple of years has been around 2 to 250 million. So it was a very big year for education, public education, to be receiving that amount of new funding. 31 rules of the board level either needed to be new rules written or existing rules amended. There is one new program that's not a grant program and 5 new grant programs, 11 new reports, we love those, and 6 requests for proposals. So potential for 6 new contracts that the state board will have to issue requests for. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we are at with the numbers and what that looks like. You may have heard the WPU was increased by 6%. And for those who are unfamiliar with the WPU, that is the unit that we use to put in the math formula to decide how much every school district or charter school gets from the state. Your WPU money is the unrestricted money. This typically funds teacher salaries, operational costs, etc. So a 6% increase in the WPU is big. The largest that we have seen in the last at least decade was 4%, and that was last year. So a big win. They also funded, those on YouTube can see chats in the YouTube chat feature, so they can chat with each other, just not us. Awesome, thank you, Leah. Chat away with each other, and if anyone on the WebEx, in the WebEx here, staff, if you can see their chats, feel free to like throw in their answers into this chat box and I'll call them out. And if that is possible, you guys can then also send some questions that staff can forward on in the chat box. So thank you. That 6% was on top of a 1.1% increase in spending to fund growth. We're always getting more kindergartners and we are losing seniors. So we've got to make sure we fund education for them. The minimum school program went up 9.5% in its total amount. So that ends up being about $5.9 billion for public education this year. The next couple of slides are just highlighting again enrollment growth. Just give you an idea. So we've got 7,902 new students, more than we did last year coming into the system. And so you can see the numbers up on the screen. We needed another $252 million to fund that additional growth. And then this slide just highlights that your local boards for school districts, not charter school, but they can now guarantee and increase the amount of property tax a little bit more to bring in some additional revenue. So the next few slides, I'm going to highlight just the funding amounts that are not attached to a piece of legislation that we'll already talk about. So on this slide, the biggest one will be this large bar here on the left, the $30 million for student safety. This is for infrastructure safety. So think security cameras, better locks on doors. If you have an older building with the office further back in the building, it's a big security move to actually have the office be the receiving point into the building so they can screen who's coming in. So a lot of buildings are getting retrofitted to move the offices up front. All of those types of things this $30 million could be used for. The $30 million was one-time money. In the legislative process, one-time versus ongoing is always the question you need to ask with money. One time means you get that amount of money for 12 months, that's it. Ongoing means you get it for 12 months and then you'll get it again for 12 months and so on without having to ask again for the money. So you keep getting it until they change the budget and take that out. So ongoing is always a big win, but we'll take 30 million one time and grant some safety enhancements for schools. Also on this slide, I believe everything else we will discuss. So I'll go to the next slide. On this one, there's 3 main things I want to point out here, and they're the first 3, or well, actually this one is a bill. The first one's computer science. We got $7 million ongoing for computer science initiatives. So teaching computer science as a course, developing curriculum, hiring staff, that's what this money can go toward. The 1.8 million for the Create Utah software. This is for every student in the state to have access to Adobe's complete suites of programs. This is the second year that has happened. In case you were not aware, the Adobe suite is currently available for free to every student in the state, grades 7 through 12. So this 1.8 million continues that for another year. Highly recommend utilizing it. It's been quite underutilized. A lot of people are unaware that they have free Adobe. So make sure that you get that out to the places and students you feel would benefit the most from it. And then here at the end, we have Qualtrics. So if you participate in any surveys and data collection in terms of dispositions and whatnot, the state board was given $900,000 to get a statewide license for Qualtrics so that we can use that as our survey platform and also give all of you access to create your own surveys as well. This final slide, concurrent enrollment, we'll discuss student transportation. This was another one not attached to a bill, $5 million additional dollars to the money that we currently receive ongoing to fund student transportation needs. So if there are questions about that, just know that there is additional money coming your way for that. And I believe the rest of these are bills. So we will move forward. And I do have a question out here, which bill, and this will also be a funding item as well, or anything else related to the legislature. But the question is, which bill are you most interested in discussing today? I don't know if you're able to send that to YouTube and staff can let me know if there are any that we need to focus on, but I want to make sure that I spend the most time on the ones that you are most interested in and not spend a ton of time on the bills that are of zero interest or low interest to this group. So think about that. If there's anything you heard about or you're interested in, let the staff in our WebEx know and they can let me know in the chat. I will move forward though, just because I don't want to take up too much of your time. And this is where I will pause and we'll actually step outside of the 2020 general session and have a conversation for a moment about the special session and what's going on. So last year, the legislature, actually it was 2018, they passed a resolution that the voters then passed to allow the legislature itself to call themselves into a special session when they choose. Previously, the Constitution required that the governor be the one to call the special session and to set the agenda. So now we're in a new situation where the legislature can call themselves in at any moment with some notice. And that is exactly what they did last week. They issued a call for a special session that started on Thursday, and the call opened the session for a 10-day window. So the legislature can set now the agenda and the length of time for the special session. Last Thursday was all COVID-19 related legislation. And what was going on with all of those pieces of legislation related to the current situation we're facing. The biggest things I would highlight would be House Joint Resolution 301. And this was a resolution that came out and requested that all school districts and charter schools plan their next school year's budget based on this year's budget. So what does that mean and why would they say that? I would say looking into the future, all of that new money we talked about, the $403 million of new funding, the 6% increase in the WPU, all of those things I think are now on the table for discussion in terms of do we actually have those funds moving forward, given the economic impacts of the current situation that we are facing. So I would say don't count on, at this point, any of those new funds happening. Plan for the money you had last year to be the same amount you'll get this year with nothing new. And if you plan that way, anything new will be gravy on top in the end. So that's why the legislature brought out House Joint Resolution 301. They wanted to make sure that everybody was conservatively planning for the future while we face some uncertainty about where the state budget will land once all of this dies down and we ramp back into a more regular pace of living. So I would say keep that in mind as there are questions about what to do with your budget and what kind of new money I might see, the answer is you probably won't see any new money and don't plan on it for now. The legislature has already expressed that they're willing and if able to bring back new funding if we know that the money will be there moving forward. That would be the biggest piece of legislation I would highlight for you to consider from last week's special session. I guess we're still in that special session for the first meeting of the special session. There was also a bill that created several waivers from statute, most of those being centered around some licensing requirements for teachers, as well as accountability and school grading related legislation that or Utah code that we would need some reprieve from because we are doing end of year testing, among other things. So the access that people need for teachers, if they have certain elements they need to renew their licenses for, those have been waived, as well as anything that the school would be held accountable for in relation to the data collected from statewide assessments, because those are not being offered. Those are the big things that came out last week. We are still in the 10-day window, and as Leah mentioned, we are having another special session that just started 6 minutes ago. The House began meeting at 9 a.m. The Senate will meet today at 2 p.m. There are three main pieces of legislation that are being considered during this convening of the first special session of the year. And that on the screen for you is House Bill 4003. It's a special needs scholarship opportunity program. I felt like this would probably be a big bill to highlight for this particular group. There is a piece of legislation that passed last session, House Bill 332, that was essentially the same bill. There have been some tweaks made. You may recall from our meeting in February, that bill is the one that creates a similar program to the Carson Smith Scholarship Program. It creates scholarship granting organizations, some nonprofit entities that you would donate money to, receive a tax credit, an income tax credit for the amount of your donation. And then the money that is collected by these organizations would then be given to families who would like to take their students out of the public education system and put them in the private school system that we have in the state. This bill makes some technical changes, makes some additional amendments to that bill. House Bill 332 passed the general session, but then was vetoed by the governor. The governor has been brought in and negotiated some changes to that bill that he vetoed, and those negotiations have essentially resulted in House Bill 4003. The main premise behind the bill remains the same. Some of the changes are more to do with how much certain families qualify for when it comes to the scholarships. They've tiered it based on income level. And there's also some requirements to look forward in a few years to see if this program should be merged with the Carson Smith Scholarship Program, or whether or not the program should remain separate. So a feasibility study has been added into this program to look at that idea about 3 years from now. The state school board has maintained an official position of opposed to this bill, as they did to House Bill 332 and its concepts. The legislature received a letter from the State Board of Education yesterday evening, highlighting the reasons for their opposition and continued opposition to this bill. Other stakeholders from the education community have also reached out to the legislature expressing their opposition to this bill. The PTA, the State Superintendent's Association, and UEA, the Utah Education Association, have all written letters to the legislature requesting no votes on House Bill 4003. So that is the current situation that we are in. By the end of the day today, we will have a better idea of whether or not this bill will survive. Because the governor was involved in the negotiation process for some of these amendments, it has been signaled that the governor will not veto the bill if it does pass the legislative session. So with that in mind, if any of you have feelings or thoughts about this particular bill, you are able to provide public comment to the legislature through their website regarding this legislation. If you go to le.utah.gov, and once you go to le.utah.gov, there's a resources tab on the page down on the left-hand side. If you click on that, it'll expand a menu, and the left-hand menu, if you read through it, one of the options is comment on a bill. Under the special session, you can click on comment on a bill, and it has a process that you can submit public comment to the legislature regarding any piece of legislation that they are considering. If you plan to do that, I might highlight for you that the House has just convened. So if you really would like to provide your comments and have it heard by both bodies, you might want to jump over really quick right now to le.utah.gov and make some public comments. So that is kind of the update of the current special session and what is going on. This is not the end of special sessions this year. As I mentioned, the economic impacts from social distancing and everyone quarantining inside has yet to be fully realized, especially where the tax commission has gone with the federal route and extending the filing date into June or July. So it's going to be very difficult for them at this point in time to project what type of numbers they are looking at without having all the filings come in. And although those are based on 2019's income before there was impact to the economy, the idea is to project out what type of money will be coming in from the 2019 taxes, projecting out potential impacts of the current downturn in the economy, and trying to spread any surplus out over the next several years so that the impact to the budget is felt much less than it would be if we just gave all the money from 2019 up front and then just dealt with whatever happens this year in next year's session. So the idea is to kind of spread the damage as best as we can. So you will be seeing a special session coming up in either late May or early June, and that will be the budget special session essentially, where they will have the best numbers that they can before the new fiscal year begins to make the decision where to make cuts and budget decisions based on the math and the numbers they have at that point. So we are not done by any means. We are just getting started. So be ready to see at least one, if not two more special sessions play out through the rest of 2020. So with that in mind, we will continue on with what happened in the 2020 general session, keeping in mind that any of these new programs I'm about to highlight may remain, may go away. The funding might go away, but the policy and the law might stay out there, so we'll be ready to go once money is available. But just keep that in mind that all of this is subject to change based on what we see coming down the road. So the next slide is House Bill 99. This is the Enhanced Kindergarten Amendments. This bill expands the grant program that allows schools to apply for all-day kindergarten programs and to fund those programs. Currently, we have about 20% of our kindergartners in the state who are testing as not ready for kindergarten in the entrance exam, receiving full-day kindergarten. About 40% of our kindergartners are entering not ready. So we wanted to expand the program so that more of those testing not ready would be able to have all-day kindergarten and additional interventions provided so that we can get them up to speed by the time they go into grade 1. So this bill does a couple of things. It gives 10 million additional ongoing dollars on top of the 7.5 the program already has. We can really double the size of the program as it currently stands. We can't expand it fully out to get all 40% of our below testing kindergartners into an all-day kindergarten program. There was not enough funding for that, but this is a large step in that direction if this funding remains. There were 2 programs you could get money from to do this. The second program has gone away and we've merged it into this one, mostly because it was federal funding that was time limited. So we have just kind of done away with that and expanded this one out and added some performance metrics into this program. The next one is House Bill 114. You'll see a few early learning bills. This was a big push this year from the state board and part of their strategic plan. So you will see a few early learning bills. House Bill 114 does 3 different things. The first thing it does is it now requires to receive a teacher license in the state of Utah that you must pass a literacy preparation assessment. Essentially, teachers, up and coming teachers who want to receive a license to teach will now have to be educated and demonstrate that knowledge in the science of reading and the latest and greatest in terms of how to get students on the proficiency levels for literacy. On top of that, the other 2 things this bill does is it provides a professional learning development grant that allows all LEAs to receive a pot of money to train their current teachers in the science of reading and also early mathematics. It will be really an early learning development grant designed to provide professional learning opportunities for pre-K to grade 3 teachers. The math currently coming out from that bill will be about $450 per teacher, per pre-K to grade 3 teacher that any school district or charter school has. The final part of this bill is it expands the early literacy program to the early learning program by adding early mathematics. The big thing from this, you have the DIBELS or Acadience test, the benchmark assessment for early literacy. This will now also add in an early mathematics benchmark assessment test as well. The state is currently issuing the RFP, the request for proposal, to procure a vendor and test that we will be using as the statewide benchmark assessment, just like we do with Acadience. So those are the 3 things that House Bill 114 does. House Bill 357 and Senate Joint Resolution 9. I could spend a lot of time on these bills. I won't, mostly because I know enough to be dangerous and not enough to be informative. But the general idea behind this is to stabilize education funding and also provide some guardrails around the current imbalance in our taxing structure. So we are the only state currently in the union that dedicates all income tax collected from corporate and individuals goes to public education, or well, to education, and sits in the education fund, and that is constitutionally guaranteed. So you are not allowed to take income tax money and spend it on non-education purposes. That would violate the Utah Constitution in the current form. So these 2 bills does 2 different things. It creates an amendment to the Constitution to now allow children and individuals with disabilities to also be the groups that can receive income tax money. So the education pot will now be shared with those individuals generally. You might be asking, well, are children and education one and the same? Yes and no. Think of all the social services that go toward children, things like CHIP, or anything from DCFS, or any of those other state agencies that provide services to children or individuals with disabilities that may not necessarily be education. They will now be allowed to utilize, the legislature will now be allowed to allocate income tax revenue to those groups as well as education. But the reason why this is actually an exciting thing, and it's not just drawing down on the education funding, is currently the law doesn't require that the legislature distribute any or portions of that money in any direction. So if the education fund had, $50 billion in it, which it doesn't, they could put 40 billion of it away in a rainy day fund and not allocate any of that. There's nothing requiring any distribution of that money. Now, the legislature has obviously been distributing that money to public education and higher ed, but in the amounts they see fit, and they do take parts out every year for rainy day funds and other situations. So House Bill 357 does a whole host of things, but I think the thing that I would highlight the most is it requires off the top that if the constitutional amendment, SJR 9. So just be aware, in November, you'll be voting as a people on whether or not to amend the Constitution. If that passes, the people in November, House Bill 357 will also go into effect, and it guarantees off the top a chunk of money that goes into a guaranteed constitutionally protected account for public education. We have never in the history of Utah had a guaranteed appropriation toward education. And it would guarantee that we fund growth every year plus increased spending at the rate of inflation. So as we talked about that 6% increase in the WPU, this would guarantee at least around a 1.5% to 2% increase every year. There have been years we've gotten zero. There have been years they have not funded growth because of some of the downturn. We saw this in 2009 when there was when we were in the recession. They were not able to fund growth, so we had to take in more students without increased funding. So the idea that all of this will now be guaranteed and set aside before any of the rest of the education fund money is distributed to any other parties, higher ed, or these new groups, children and individuals with disabilities, that's a big win. That's very exciting. And to have some growth built into it is also very exciting. We were at the table, the state board took a position of support on both of these pieces of legislation, if that is something that you're curious about as you as an individual assess whether or not you want to vote for the constitutional amendment. This is something that the state board worked in negotiation on and came out in support for. So with that, we'll move to the next one, Senate Bill 99. Hopefully I'm not driving you all crazy. We still have another hour, but we have a few more brain breaks. I'm just really sad I can't see all of your thoughts in the chat. Because I do have a good question that I really want answered. You'll see in a moment. Senate Bill 99, school leadership. This creates a grant program for school districts and charter schools to develop their own leadership development programs. So it serves 3 different populations: aspiring principals, so the up and coming leaders, teachers, administrators who are not yet principals, new principals in their first 3 years, or existing principals. And it provides money for professional development for all 3 of those groups. So the new or the up and coming aspiring principals, you would use the money for internships and residencies to begin training. The new principals, it'll be a mentorship program, and existing principals, it's a professional development grant. So you would get money and you would design at the local level your program based on how you're going to use the money to hit those 3 groups. We're really excited about this bill. We received $5 million in this bill. We had asked originally for 15, so not as much as we wanted, but it will be a competitive grant. Everyone will qualify for a $15,000 planning grant for their district. And then from those planning, those plans that are developed, we'll pick the top 10 or 15 LEAs based on quality of plans and provide them an implementation grant to build out their full leadership program at the local level. The next 2 bills are the accountability bills. House Bill 420, the turnaround program amendments. For any of you who are in a turnaround school, this bill essentially gives the state board the ability to set some new exit criteria as well as entrance criteria to some extent. So we will be able to respond better to feedback you may have about the entrance or exit of turnaround program. It does several other technical things, which I won't dive into today, but just know that if you have some thoughts or feedback on the turnaround program, especially the exit criteria, you now have a better voice with the state board in being able to make tweaks and changes to that without having to wait for a legislative session every year to make those changes. Senate Bill 119 does away with school grading for 2 years. So the 2019-20 and the 2021 school years, there will be no issuance of school grades. And we'll revisit that conversation 2 years from now when we need to decide if we're going to keep school grading or get rid of it. The next 2 bills are safe and healthy school bills, or slides, excuse me. I will try and hit all of these in a way that I hope make sense and not spend too much time on the ones that this group may not necessarily need. So House Bill 58 is a large bill. This does multiple things. The first thing it does is it allows school districts to confiscate and destroy e-cigarette paraphernalia without having to involve law enforcement or contacting the parents. So if a student brings a parent's paraphernalia to school, you no longer have to return that to the parent. You can destroy it and have the backing of law to do so. The other big thing that this bill does is it creates a requirement that every school principal develop, in consultation with teachers and staff, a positive behavior plan for the school to address behaviors that might lead to a student using things like e-cigarettes. There is going to be money associated with this bill as well. We received $4.3 million so that a positive behavior specialist can be designated in the school. That would be an existing staff member that will receive $3,000 a year stipend from this bill to implement the positive behavior plan and run positive behavior support groups for the school. So think Hope Squads or Golden Gate Club, those types of organizations. If you were the administrator or the staff member to run that, you would receive a $3,000 a year stipend and $1,000 a year to purchase materials to implement the positive behavior plan. That is a big piece of House Bill 58. I will move on now to House Bill 323. I figured this would also be a group that would be interested in this bill. This bill does two things. First, there is the school-based mental health professionals grant that we already have. It started last year. Many of you may recall there were schools that applied, maybe your LEA applied and received a grant to hire social workers, school psychologists, nurses, counselors, and the like to perform mental health services in the school. Those grants require a match. This bill changes the matching requirement. It expands what can be used for the match. It was limiting at first. It now expands what counts as a match, and it gets rid of the match after 3 years. So if you've submitted a 3-year plan, when you resubmit after your 3 years are up, you will no longer have to match the money. You will just get the money from the grant. The other thing this bill does is it creates the opportunity for LEAs to opt into offering mental health screeners in their schools. You would be able to offer the mental health screener. The screener chosen by the LEA must be approved by the state board. And it also allows for a small portion of funding to be used for providing qualified parents essentially scholarships to seek treatment based on the screeners. So if a parent has a screener that flags their child to be potentially having whatever mental illnesses or cognitive disabilities, they could then go get officially diagnosed and receive treatment and seek reimbursement for those costs through the LEA. Keep in mind the bill gave the state board $500,000 to be used for procuring screeners and those scholarships. Not a lot of money, but it is an opportunity that is out there. We'll be writing a board rule on how you can qualify for receiving reimbursements for parents. House Bill 171, threat amendments. You can no longer make a threat against a school and get away with it. It's now a crime. There's diminished punishments for a minor that makes threats. This includes hoaxes. So the kid who thinks they're being funny calling in the bomb threat, although no intent to actually follow through with it, will also be found guilty of a misdemeanor. House Bill 16 requires that schools, local boards or governing authorities review every year the schools that are not participating or offering breakfast and have an internal conversation as to why. It also allows the state board to spend the money they receive for school lunch on school meals. So we can now be a little more creative at the state level on how we allocate that money out. It doesn't have to go just to lunch. Next slide, and then there is a brain break, so deep breath, we're getting there. House Bill 222 is the breakfast bill you may have heard about through social media. This was the bill that kind of went viral a little bit based on some comments that were made. This bill does three things. It requires that if you offer school lunch through the National School Lunch Program, you must also offer school breakfast. And it also requires that if you have a certain percentage of your students on free and reduced lunch, that you offer breakfast after the bell. You can continue to offer breakfast before school starts, but if you have the essentially 30% or more of your students on free and reduced lunch, you will need to make sure the food is still available after the day has begun. It also has a waiver that LEAs can seek from those two requirements. The next three bills I'll go over quickly. Senate Bill 37 is essentially the funding mechanism for House Bill 58. It puts a tax on e-cigarettes, and the tax that's collected will pay for those stipends and those $3,000 stipends and the $1,000 for materials. It also does a whole host of other things, and we won't dive too deep into today. House Bill 384, this is the bill regarding referrals to court. So if you had a student who's misbehaving and previously you had to do evidence-based interventions, and then if those didn't work, you could refer the student on to the court system. This now inserts an additional step before you can refer on to courts. You must contact JJS, the Juvenile Justice System, and use their programs after your evidence-based programs haven't worked. And if those don't work, then you can refer to court. So an additional step. House Bill 392 is the early warning program. It's a pilot program that Box Elder, Provo, and Ogden school districts have been participating in. It basically aggregates the data that you already have in your student information system and creates a warning program based on all the data that's already available to you on students who may be at risk for certain things like dropping out, academic failure. It also has social emotional flags that it can put up based on discipline data that's being entered. Really cool program. It sunsetted because it was a pilot and we were able to bring it back, and the funding has continued. So it's still the same amount of funding we had for the pilot. There is hope in the future that we will seek a statewide appropriation and bring this to every LEA. It's been very successful so far in the pilots. So here's the question that has been burning through my mind. Lots of results of a quarantine have happened. I don't know if some of you are like me and have been experiencing very vivid dreams, almost fever level dreams. I don't know why that is. Well, there's a Washington Post article about why that is the case. Really interesting article. If you want to read it later, Google that. But one thing that has also occurred to me and has happened to me during quarantine is there have been snacks I abandoned long ago in life that now I crave every day, like Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pies, Cheetos, cereals that I haven't had in years, like Cinnamon Toast Crunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I stopped being a bread person a while ago, and now I need like PB&J all the time. So it got me wondering, why am I reverting back to childhood favorites that I haven't had in years? And I was curious if others have experienced sudden revisiting of snacks from your past. Or maybe there's just been a go-to snack you've always had and you're just eating more of it now that you're at home. I don't know. So the question I've been kind of curious is, what's come back to your life that hasn't been there for a while based on food? And am I the only person that has reverted to childhood comfort foods? We have a few from staff. Natay is saying graham crackers and fruit snacks. I will let you know that at Uncle Homeschool yesterday, I ate half of the fruit snacks my sister left for the children, for myself. Leah, Munchos, potato chips. Sounds weird, but so tasty. Not munchies. That's a snack mix, not the same. I have never heard of Munchos, so I'm excited to try those. Frosted mini wheats and avocado toast. Kim, how very millennial of you. I love it. And Gushers. Oh, I actually haven't thought about Gushers until now for a long time. Twinkies. I am so glad they brought the Twinkie back. Now I'm going to go to the store today and get Twinkies and the Hostess cupcakes. I haven't had those for a long time. Um, and trail mix and Doritos. Can never go wrong with any of those. The question is, which Doritos? Are you a nacho cheese Dorito person or Cool Ranch? Nacho cheese. Okay. Interesting. I'm a Cool Ranch person, but hey, you can have the nacho cheese. I'll stick with Cool Ranch. Will be great. Um, so I don't know, all of those people out there in YouTube, if you can send a chat somewhere or send me an email later, I'd be curious. Have you gone back to snacks you let go a long time ago? And if so, what are they? And are they changing your life for the better? Um, moving on. Hopefully that was a nice brain break for a moment. Deep breaths. Hopefully my voice hasn't reached that level of annoying or, I mean, it is annoying to begin with, but hopefully I haven't put you to sleep trying to be entertaining as much as I can. This is a lot of information. And it may or may not apply to all of you, but I want to make sure that I just kind of at least touch everything so that if there is some kind of angle that might be of use for you, or so you're aware that it's out there for you. So the next slide or two, I believe, is curriculum-based legislation that passed. House Bill 334 creates a civics education engagement project pilot program. Say that 5 times fast. There's only enough money in this bill for about 2 or 3 school districts to apply, or charter schools. The idea of this bill is right now to graduate, you have to pass the civics test, which is essentially tests taken from the citizenship test we give those who are becoming naturalized into the US. This would look at the idea of, instead of a test, a project. So think applied learning for sure. The idea being going out and actually being engaged in your city council, coming in, participating with the state board or your local school board, sitting on a committee, sitting on a council, actually being engaged in the process and demonstrating you understand the process through the project you chose. This the data we get from this will be used to inform whether or not down the road we get rid of the civics test and replace it with a civics project requirement for graduation. It might also be utilized in moving forward on competency-based education as kind of a pilot subject area, because we're already kind of doing more demonstrated and applied learning and in that regard. So keep a lookout for that. Very few LEAs will be doing it, but it will inform some massive policy decisions down the road. Senate Bill 73, you can now give Acadians in grades 4 through 6, and there's money for it. So that's exciting. If you want to continue to get that literacy benchmark assessment, you can now do it all the way grades 1 through 6. Senate Bill 93 is a math and science opportunities for students and teachers program, or the MOST program. For those of you wondering what this is, it is the U-Star program that we had, and we have rebranded it. That's essentially it. There is already another U-Star program in the state. It's a state agency that was recently disbanded, and there was a lot of confusion when we said U-Star, which U-Star we were talking about. So we have rebranded this to be the MOST program. School employment bills. So there's quite a few of these. I will do my best to cover all of these. House Bill 141 is the Educator Salary Incentive Program. So this is a teacher salary supplement program. If you teach in certain areas, this group being one of the areas highlighted by this bill, special education. This bill expands essentially who can qualify for this to include social workers, and it also allows for, unrelated to the salary supplement program, it also allows LEAs to hire social workers if they don't have the state Board of Education social worker license. If they just have the regular run-of-the-mill social worker license they get from DOPL, the Department of Professional Licensing with the state, they can now use that to be hired at a school without having to get a second license on top of it from the state board. House Bill 107, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools. This is the grant program. to get high-performing teachers into high-poverty schools. But currently, the grant program is only grades 4 through 6, and now it includes grades 1 through 3. So it covers the elementary school span, essentially, of grades 1 through 6. That program will be on pause, however, because it is based on growth data that we get from assessments that are not being issued this year. So this will be, we'll get baseline data next year, and moving forward, this program will kick back in. House Bill 148 requires that the governor nominate an inspiring school employee to the federal award program that exists with the Department of Education. So there will be a nominating process through the governor's office. If you know an inspiring school employee and you want them to be one of the 50 people competing at the federal level, there is now a requirement that the governor actually participate in that program. The federal program has always existed. We have not necessarily always participated as a state. So this would now require essentially that we participate and that the governor nominates someone. So be on the lookout for that if you know someone you would like to honor. House Bill 22, Utah Retirement Systems Amendments. This is a bill that in some form has run for several years and has finally passed. It changes the way that a retired person coming back to work, how coming back to work for the state would impact their retirement. Previously, if you had retired from the state, they had some anti-double dipping laws. That causes an issue for areas like law enforcement and school teachers. When you have great people retiring and there's a shortage, you would love to bring them back in, but they're not incentivized to come back in because their retirement gets negatively impacted by coming back. This bill essentially corrects some of those disincentives to come back. So if there are people who you would love to have come back and help, but they've retired and they're like, I don't want it to ruin my retirement plan, let them know there's a bill that has now changed that, and you should check with your HR directors on the specifics of how it would impact one retirement plan over the other, because obviously retirement has changed over the years. So depending on when they retired and when they were hired, would impact what kind of system they're in. But this does create some positive incentives for teachers, especially that have retired and you would like to bring back, even for a short period. Those disincentives may now be gone. So check into that. House Bill 108, Medical Specialist in Public Schools. This was a message bill. This bill already could happen, but it wasn't expressly stated in the law, and the legislator who ran it wanted everyone to be very clear that it could be, that what this bill does could happen. So they ran a bill and actually made it the law, even though it technically already was. What it does is it allows LEAs to create a separate salary schedule for medical specialists rather than keeping them on the steps and lanes that are kept for teachers. So you can pay more and more market related values for people like social workers, psychologists, nurses, speech pathologist, etc. So if that's of interest, let your LEAs know that they can definitely create their own salary schedule for those groups. They don't have to tie it to the teacher's salary schedule. These other three employment bills, Senate Bill 195, if you're hiring minors under the age of 18 at your LEA, you no longer have to do a background check on the minor. House Bill 344, in case you were wondering, it is now definitely illegal to hire somebody who is a registered sex offender to work at your school in any capacity. That is why this action was brought forward. They couldn't get a teacher's license, but they could be a janitor or other employees. So if they're a registered sex offender now, they are not allowed to get any type of job within an LEA. House Bill 416, it's unfortunate that we have to have this bill, but if the student is 18 years old, but still enrolled in public school, you can no longer have inappropriate relationships with the student and have that be legally okay. Because although they are 18, they're still enrolled in a public school. And you don't have to be, the inappropriate relationship does not have to be between an employee and an 18-year-old of the same school, which is what the current law specified. And we'd had some cases where the employee was from a different LEA, but had had contact with the student due to assisting in other forms. So being in the same LEA or the same school now does not matter. And the student needs to be graduated before any relationships can convene. With that, if I scroll in the right direction, now we'll jump into post-secondary bills. Very quickly, the first two bills are just scholarship related. The next few slides are really for the school counselors, but if you want to be aware of these things, I think it's always helpful. The Utah Promise Scholarship, they changed some of the formula for how you calculate that. This scholarship is supposed to be last dollars in after all the other aid and scholarships and awards have been awarded. So essentially, you could get the Utah Promise Scholarship, but if you got a full ride from the University of Utah, you wouldn't get the Utah Promise Scholarship on top of it to go buy a car. They would just no longer give you money because you don't need your tuition or books covered, and they would choose someone else. So last dollars in, they're changing how that's calculated a little bit, so just be aware of that. Student aid amendment, House Bill 256. This just requires that to get any of the Regent scholarships, so the state funded scholarships, like the Utah Promise Scholarship, you have to fill out a FAFSA form first. Currently you don't, but this requires that you do. House Bill 409, concurrent enrollment amendments. This bill just requires that higher ed institutions look at offering upper division concurrent enrollment courses. Currently, all of the current enrollment courses that high school students can take are 1,000 and 2,000 level courses. This would require that higher ed institutions look at 3,000 level and above, and if there are any that they could offer as concurrent enrollment to high school students that would qualify. It also changes the amount of money that is appropriated for the concurrent enrollment program. Currently, the law reads that enrollment growth generally, so we talked about those 7,900 new students, and that's like 1.1% increase in student enrollment. Concurrent enrollment would get a 1.1% increase in their funding. This now changes it to enhancements for the proportionate, sorry, my mind went blank, the proportionate amount of enrollment in the program. So if the program increases 10% from the year before statewide, we would get 10% more from the legislature than we did the year before. So it's really keeping the money on track with the enrollment of the program rather than education generally. It also requires, this is a really exciting part that might be relevant for all of you, that law enforcement, local education authorities, LEAs, so charters and school districts must prioritize the money they get for concurrent enrollment by closing enrollment gaps with underrepresented student populations, including students with special needs. So that's a really exciting thing. We've never required that LEAs consider closing the enrollment gap with underrepresented student populations, and this bill now makes that the law. House Bill 336, I'll actually go to the next slide. It is a concurrent enrollment certificate pilot program. The idea here is you get certain certificates and it guarantees that those credits are transferable to all 8 public ed institutions. Current issue that we typically face, I got my English credit concurrent enrollment through Weber, but I am going to college at the U, and the U says, cool story, but you need to take our English, so you can't waive your English requirement that you've satisfied at Weber because theirs is not as good as ours. This now does away with that issue to an extent. If you get these certificates at these different levels, the concurrent enrollment credits just for those certificates are now transferable to all 8 institutions. It is not universal for every concurrent enrollment course. So the launch certificate is 6 CE credit in any subject, and you have to get the certificate from the State Board of Education. The Discover certificate is 15 concurrent enrollment credits, 3 in each of the following areas listed on the slide. And that would give you half of your gen ed requirements forgiven at any of the 8 institutions. The Transform certificate is issued by the State Board of Regents, so USHE in higher ed, not us. The first two are from USBE. So if you get the one from the Board of Regents and they're setting up their requirements in a board rule, if you meet those, you'll get a certificate that exempts you from gen ed requirements from all 8 institutions in the state. Similarly, if you get the CTE credential of Transform, you have to have done at least 900 hours or a 30 credit CTE program. You would get a certificate that waives the gen ed requirements at a tech college. So last but not least, on these post-secondary bills, Senate Bill 162, if you have a criminal record, you can now apply for financial aid. You couldn't before. Senate Bill 117 allows you to use state regent scholarships at private institutions. So now if you get the Utah Promise Scholarship or the Regent Scholarship, you can use it at BYU or Westminster, where before you could not, it had to be a public institution. Senate Bill 151 just splits out our gifted and talented program from our AP and our IB program and keeps concurrent enrollment as a separate program. So now we have 3 different programs rather than having them all mushed together. It just creates more logistical clarity. But otherwise, that's all that bill does. Charter schools. So if any of you go to a charter school, I would say be aware. Senate Bill 94 requires that before school districts received information from the Department of Family and Child Services regarding children who have been abused or there's neglect or issues in the home. There was no requirement in law that that information be given to a charter school. The reason for that really was the law was old and was written before charter schools existed, so it read school districts. Well, the Department of Family and Child Services took the law very literally and was only reporting this information to school districts. Now, if you had a good relationship with somebody at DCFS, you may, as a charter school, have received some of this information, but they, by and large, were not providing it. This now requires that you give it to a charter as well as a school district. So DCFS will now be providing the information to all LEAs. House Bill 242 is the big accounting amendments for charter schools. On this next slide, it does require, just for everyone's sake, to know that if you're into accounting at all, if you're like me, you are not into accounting, but just in case there's anyone out there who loves accounting and numbers, everyone will have to use GASB as their accounting standards. There's GASB and there's FASB. GASB has more stringent requirements, typically because it's public money. So GASB is now going to be required for all LEAs to use in how they run their books. And it requires a few other elements for charter schools to follow when it comes to how they run their finances. So if you are close or connected with the financial person and you're at your charter schools, you might want to give them a little nudge and say, hey, House Bill 242 is out there and it changes how you do your job. Potentially, they may already be doing it this way anyway, but it changes for some charter schools. So just be aware that that's out there. So one question that I have laying out there is I always love to look forward to the future. We are living in a world of special sessions this year due to the current situation. So my question for all of you to just help me and everyone out at USBE down the road is, as we look to the general session for 2021, is there a legislative issue you would love to see taken up? A program that needs a tweak, a fix, a new program, a new approach, something that happened last session that didn't pass? I'd be very curious if any of you have thoughts or feelings or ideas on things you would love to see, and suggestions of what our staff might proactively approach for next January. Because as I mentioned, we can open bills for next year starting in May, which is crazy. They can start drafting bills all the way in May, and it won't be until January. But just know, if you wait till January to start bringing up your legislative idea, you are too late, and your bill will probably not come out in time to pass. So bringing stuff up now is actually very strategic and advantageous if you got some things you feel passionate about. So I'll throw that question out there because we don't have a chat box directly with all of you. Feel free to send your ideas to myself, or you can send them to Leah or any member of our staff, and they can pass them along to me as well. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about some things. If you had a blank slate, what would you change and do? That will help us as we move forward. So deep breaths. We're actually not too far from the end. And then we will potentially open it up to questions if there's a way to do that. We'll keep moving. I'm still really curious about some of the snacks out there. And I really want a Twinkie now. So who said Twinkie? Larly, you've gotten into my mind with the Twinkies. I will be getting those later today. Why not? We deserve it in these trying times, right? Leah says she's going to try them too, and she doesn't even like them. Amen. It's the cream filling that gets me, to be honest, which is why I also wanted to do the cupcakes. Chocolate as well. Anyway, have I had breakfast? No, I have not. Did I buy impulsively yesterday at the store a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch that I plan to eat after his presentation? Yes. Anyway, I will continue on. Hopefully that was a good diversion from me rambling on about legislation. House Bill 77 just caps. So we're now going to talk about funding and taxes. Some of these get technical, and you would be very misguided to assume that I would be the right person to lead you on the nuances of all of these bills. I know enough, again, on some of these to be dangerous. As again, numbers and accounting is not my strongest suit. It is my weakness I am working on. Lots of learning opportunities in that area for myself. So I will tell you as much as I can. House Bill 77, every time we increase the WPU, so we give more money to LEAs at the state level, it is directly tied to your property tax rate. So your property tax rate goes up every time we give more money to schools. So this bill caps the amount that your property tax could go up. So if we increase the WPU by 1, 2, 3, or 4%, the proportionate property tax amount, there's like a math formula that says if it increases by 1%, property tax goes up X. I don't know the formula. It caps it at, if the state increases the WPU at 4%, we'll continue to raise property tax, but 5, 6, or beyond, the state will fully fund that from the state coffers and will not fund part of it from increased property tax rates. So that's nice. Kind of levels out the local impact of increasing state funding for schools. I bet I did not know, if you're like me, that I did not realize they were connected, but back, I believe in 2018, there was a bill that tied the two together. So every time we gave more money at the statewide level, it would automatically increase property taxes. Now at least it puts a cap in. Senate Bill 104 increases the amount that a local board of a school district essentially can raise property tax to and provide some additional funding through a weird system on that. But that is all I will tell you on that bill. As I would tell you more, I might mislead you, but it does allow your local boards some more flexibility in increasing their property tax rates. House Bill 434 does two things. We do have funding for necessarily existent small schools. So think about the schools that are out in those areas that it doesn't financially make sense to put a school and pay people, but you need to put a school out there because there's a population that needs to come from far and wide somewhere, and it's the best, most central location. Those are what we call our necessarily existent small schools. They're small because the population is sparse and spread out, but we need to offer something to the people out there that isn't completely onerous to get to. You don't have to drive like 5 hours to get to school. This changes some of the funding for those schools. It kind of increases some amounts, so that's exciting if you're in one of these necessarily existing small schools. The other part of this bill, unrelated to that, is it increases arts funding for schools in counties of the 4th, 5th, or 6th class. So, not the Wasatch Front. If you're wondering what counties are those, not the Wasatch Front or Washington County. Pretty much everyone else, as I'm losing my voice, which is exciting, but hopefully you can still hear me. Also, Leah, you love snowballs. Leah and I have discussed some food choices in the recent past, her love for chocolate covered cinnamon bears, which I don't agree with, and now her love for snowballs, which I do not agree with. I like coconut. I do not like coconut presented to me in this way. That is okay. Leah and I agree on much more than we disagree. Emily likes chocolate covered cinnamon bears as well. I don't understand. Don't understand. I don't like cinnamon bears to begin with. Anyway, Senate Bill 113 Arts Program. So this is the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program. This essentially increased the funding, $4 million of extra funding for this program, which is and it does require that the legislature look at growth of the program every year when assessing their budget decisions, which you would hope they're doing anyway, but now it definitely guarantees that they do that. Chocolate covered cinnamon bears happen at Leah's house every day. I will send you some. You can have any that anyone ever gives me, Leah. I will never eat them. Senate Bill 202. This is another one you can give a nudge to your financial people. It allows LEAs to make amendments to their financial reports after they've submitted them to the state board up to a certain time and for certain reasons. I will not tell you what those are because if I did, I will mislead you, but just know that your financial friends will like this bill. Students in school. Okay, first I need to pause and be like, how we doing? Making sure everyone's okay. We're not asleep. I'm trying to start inserting lots of talk about food and other things to make sure we're remaining entertaining while I'm still trying to give you information. But I can hear myself talking as well. My ears are starting to hit that point where I'm like, wow, I've been talking a really long time. So I just want to make sure we're all awake. We're all good. I'm assuming I'm getting thumbs up from across the state, even though I can't see you. So deep breaths, we're getting there. We're very close. House Bill 14, we changed the definitions for absenteeism and truancy. Counts toward what? So if you're the data person or connected with the data people, thank you, Kim, just know that how you count an absence, make sure that it's in line now with the statewide definition. You would be surprised, or maybe not. I was surprised to find out that absences is very local in how we define them. So when we at the state level would get your absence data, we didn't really know what we were looking at. Some LEAs count 5 tardies, whether you were 30 seconds tardy or half an hour tardy or whatever, as an absence, even though the student was actually there. And other LEAs don't use tardies at all toward an absence. So the data really was apples and oranges and useless to inform statewide policy because we don't know what you're all doing. So we have created a standard, a statewide standard, so that we can use that data. And surprisingly enough, we did not collect absences at the state level divided by or split out between absences with an excuse or without an excuse. We just got absences. So we didn't really know what those absences meant or what they were. Do we have, 90% of them are excused? So we just have a lot of parents who are taking students out, or 90% of them unexcused. We got a lot of ditchers or sluffers. Also, interesting question for you all. Do you use the word slough? A lot of people not from Utah have never heard the word slough. You say cut class or ditch class. I don't know why it's a Utah-ism and where that came from. If anyone ever finds out where the word slough came from, I would be very curious. But anyway, we don't understand the data we're getting. So this creates uniform definitions. House Bill 376, I'm going to jump diagonally. Dropout prevention amendments. This expands the list of schools that qualifies for being exempt from this program. So let me know if you are interested in finding out if you are exempt. We did put special schools as defined by the feds. So those schools that really specialize in students with severe cognitive disabilities and injuries as part of that list. So some of you, if you work at a special school, you are now exempt from the dropout prevention program. These other two bills are really minor. House Bill 68 just starts sharing some responsibilities for apprenticeship and work-based learning programs with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And Senate Bill 147, school internship safety agreements. Interestingly enough, to offer an internship to a student, the employee of the employer who is offering the internship would have to undergo the same background check that a teacher undergoes in order to have a minor student with them. That's a little onerous, and there were several internships that were actually canceled because employers were like, I'm not going to deal with that. That's too much work. Like, I'm doing you a solid and a favor by bringing in the student. Why do I have to go through all these hoops? So this bill was born and passed, and it does not require that background check if the employer with the LEA has a school safety agreement. So my student is going to go to you, and I, the employer, am going to agree to you that the employee I have chosen to supervise the student and provide them work is not a criminal, a sex offender, or whatnot. They're upstanding and are great, and I will guarantee that they're safe with that person. So that is the compromise with that bill. The next two bills, Senate Bill 67, it sets aside $4 million for LEAs to purchase financial information systems. So again, nudge those finance friends of yours. They can get some money to buy a new system that will communicate better with the state system. Always good, tech solutions. Senate Bill 124, American Indian Alaskan Native Education Amendments. This provides more funding for a program that gives grant money to schools that serve high levels of their student population are American Indian or Alaskan Native. Technology, very quickly, House Bill 372, there's a new legislative commission that will inform the legislature and the State Board of Education on policy recommendations around digital wellness and citizenship and tech safety. House Bill 360 is really a USBE bill that changes how we can use some money for our early learning platform and gives us some flexibility with the funds that we didn't have before. House Bill 143, Highway Patrol has to inspect every bus that a school district has. Didn't know that. Highway Patrol didn't love that. That's a lot of work to inspect every single bus. So Representative Perry, who works for and is a highway patrolman, ran this bill to require that only 20% of the school bus fleet needs to be surveyed. And if a chunk of those fail the inspection, then the highway patrol will do every bus. But it's now going to be a sampling rather than every single bus. House Bill 84, you are all citizens. If you drive a car, you might want to know about this. This essentially doubles the fine for passing a school bus when the lights are flashing and the stop sign is out. I didn't know until this bill was ran that school districts actually get a portion of that traffic ticket. So this could also increase a little bit of funding for school districts, although we hope that it doesn't increase funding because it would require traffic violations to do so. But don't pass a bus. It goes from $250 for your first offense to $500 now, so it is not cheap. School fees, just know that in House Bill 80, we've changed how some of the data is collected. In House Bill 391, we have redefined what is a textbook because last year there's a big school fees bill that passed, and it basically said starting in the 22-23 school year, you cannot charge textbook fees at all. We didn't define what a textbook was, though. So there were questions about what does that mean and what does it not mean. So this provides that definition so that we are very clear about what you cannot charge a fee for when it comes to textbooks. We're almost done now. The miscellaneous slides, everything else that didn't have a nicely crafted category to fit in. I won't highlight all of these. I will point out HCR 3. It requires that school districts and charter schools have a conversation, or it doesn't require, suggest It's a resolution. A resolution is different from a bill in that it is a statement. So when it passes, and if the governor signs it, which he doesn't have to, it is the legislature and potentially the governor saying, we feel this way about something. It doesn't require anything. It's just a statement of, or an expression of thoughts or feelings or opinions. And you feel strongly enough, you want everyone to know how you feel. Shout it from the rooftops. So one thing that they feel strongly on and passed actually with a lot of positive feedback was late start times for high school. Moving high school to like an 8 or 8:30 start time. And this just encourages school districts to look at this idea and think about it, have a conversation. Same with HCR5, it's a resolution or a thought and opinion that we want to put our stamp on. I feel this way about this. We are designating a Utah Education Support Professionals Day. I do not recall within the bill what day we chose, but there is now going to be there's a statement that we should celebrate a day honoring support professionals. Senate Bill 21 does 4 random things, none of which I think are really relevant to this group, except the one, it will eventually remove the annual requirement for the teacher salary supplement program. So for those of you who have received that stipend and you apply every year to get it, the eventual product of one part of this bill is you won't have to keep applying. Once you're in, you're in. And we have the ability at the state board through our cactus system to actually verify every year whether or not you remain in. So there's no need to require that you all fill out an application. So we're tweaking some tech solutions regarding that. But just know down the road, you will not have to apply every year. You just have to apply once and then we'll let you know if you've fallen out. And then that's when you would have to reapply. Regional education service agencies, if you are a member of a regional service center, like if your LEA is part of a rural consortium and they like to apply together and get larger chunks of money to spread and share things across, this bill makes regional service centers the same as an LEA. So they can now apply to a grant the same way that a school district or charter school can, where before there were certain programs they were barred from applying for money for. The caveat, they have to receive permission from all of their members. So all of the schools that are a member to the Regional Service Center have to say, cool, I won't apply for that grant. And we'll have you apply using our collective student population or whatever the case may be as the criteria. And the employee that could be hired from the grant, for example, would work for them rather than for one specific school district. So that's exciting, actually. I think it really empowers our smaller districts and charter schools who are members of a regional service center to get access to more in a collective way. This slide, there's really not a whole lot that I think would interest this group. So I will not cover any of these bills. If there's a bill on here that you're like, but wait, I found that interesting, send me an email. I'll call you and we'll talk all about it. But I don't think there's anything here that is really exciting for all of you. And that's the end. Essentially, I'm going to pull this down and pull up this. So this is the state school board's website. I would highlight the legislative session summary tab on our scrolling banner on the homepage. You click on that and you're like, wow, Jeff, you cruised through some of that. I passed out 15 minutes in, but thanks. And now I wish I would have listened. Oh, you are not seeing the website. Thank you for that. Let me stop sharing for a moment and let me re-share that screen. Did that work? Emily, do we now see the website? Perfect. I'll start over. So again, for those who fell asleep, which is hopefully none of you, because we kept this engaged and exciting the entire time, and I'm going to have a hostess break and Cinnamon Toast Crunch after because of all of it. On our homepage, you would go to the legislative session summary. Click on that, sorry. And if you did pass out and you're like, dang, I really wish I would have listened, you can click on this 2020 Public Ed Summary. And you can share this with anyone too. If you're like, oh, well, that bill was really important to my coworker who has nothing to do with special ed, but I should tell them about it, but I don't remember it. This is the link I would recommend you send. This is what we call our bill book. Every year we put together pretty much everything that you just saw in a scrollable PDF. Some of these should look familiar. The slides were derived straight from this. There's more, the finances in here. And we also we highlight in more depth some of our top bills. So there's that constitutional amendment and the stabilization funding for public ed, and kind of explains it a little bit more in detail if you want to kind of go back and look at that. And last but not least, there is a summary and action steps for state board, for LEAs, the funding, when it goes into effect, for every single education bill that passes this session that is of relevance or importance to the public ed community. So you can scroll through this if you are having anxiety at night and not able to sleep because of the current situation. I can promise you this: you don't need melatonin, you don't need a pop of Benadryl. Just open the bill book and you will be set. Although if you're like me, you won't be, because I actually geek out on this stuff and would end up reading all of it. But this is a resource here for all of you. These slides that you saw will be posted in this area on the website as well. So if you're interested in reviewing the slides you saw today, those will be posted in the near future also. So you have access to everything I provided to you. I am always around if you have more questions. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. It is an incredible resource. It's super helpful. And we haven't done a great job of advertising it in the past. We do it every year. But yeah, if you were like passed out, thought, I don't want to listen to this guy talk about Twinkies, don't worry, we've got you covered. Are there any questions, thoughts, feelings that I can answer or speak to? I'll turn to the staff that's in the WebEx and ask them if there's any way they want to facilitate a Q&A, or if there are any questions that they have that they'd like me to cover. I am here, and we've got another, 15-ish minutes.
So Jeff, this is Leah.
Mhm.
So I have asked all of the directors, all the participants, if they have questions, to email them to Brian Christensen at schools.utah.gov, Brian with the Y, Christensen, S-E-N. I think he has also put it in the chat, in the YouTube chat. So we can get those, we'll compile all of those questions and we'll respond to everyone. So if the question relates to more than one LEA, next week we'll compile those and I'll give you a buzz and we can make sure that we can get everybody the responses to those questions. So thank you so much. That was really helpful and entertaining, and I hope everyone, so we've, for USEAM, we've demonstrated where the bill book is every year for the past couple years. So hopefully all of you who have been a director for a while or administrator for a while have already in past years downloaded the bill book and used it. I know I already have one that's tabbed all over the place. And so it's a fantastic resource. So you can see there's a printable version right there online. So if you have questions, please send Brian Christensen an email. And Jeff, we're seeing in the chat that everyone is really thankful for the presentation. They appreciate the information. They're really grateful that you joined us today. So thank you very much. And thank you for the work that you do on our behalf. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm glad that there were a few people still awake at the end. So thank you all.
I think they were. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. It's 10:19 on my clock, and we are going to go dark for a couple of minutes so everybody can get up and get themselves a Twinkie. And then we're going to come back and start with Tracy Gooley and Laura Lee Gillespie doing Indicator 3 and UPIPS updates at 10:30. So at 10:29, I will come back and start telling people that we are ready to begin again. So everybody get up, stretch, get a treat, and we will see you again in 10 minutes. Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. It's 10:29. We're going to start again in 1 minute.
Leah, this is Kim. I just want to do a sound check. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Had a little anxiety this morning, but we got it.
Okay, friends, welcome back. It's 10:30. We're excited to continue with our agenda. Tracy and Laura Lee are now going to give us updates on indicator 3 and UPIPS. So we'll turn it over to Tracy.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me, Leah, and see my slides?
Yep, we've got both. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So this is probably going to be the shortest presentation that you've had from me ever. We've got a couple slides just updating what's been going on with some indicator 3 and RDA stuff. So fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, we discovered that some of the data that was sent to you guys in your initial RDA letter was incorrect. So specifically for 3C proficiency, grades 3-8 math, we had accidentally given you the previous year's assessment data that was used in FFY 2017, not last year's current data for FFY 18. So we had to rerun that data on your letters for you. It was also discovered that there was some RISE data that was missing as well. And we found that we had 23 math records and 29 ELA records that did not get into your letters appropriately. So with that, we did not have an impact on indicator 3 at the state level when we found those missing records that were not submitted. However, it did impact 5 LEAs in their math scores and 9 LEAs in their ELA scores. So I will be reaching out to those 5 and 9 LEAs personally, just so that you're aware, so that you, when we distribute new letters and data to you, you can make sure you know what you're looking at. So with that, we are redoing RDA letters with all the corrected data for you guys. Lindsay and her team are hopeful that they actually will be able to possibly have these letters sent to you tomorrow, but if not, early next week at the latest. So what does that mean for your risk score? In the fact that we have this new data that we're presenting to you. What you're going to find when you get this final letter that comes to you is you will be assigned a risk score within indicator 3 itself in your final letter. We are still expecting that you will answer to comments and activities and address indicator 3 in your PIP plans if you had a high risk in that area. We're asking you to please make sure you're using this new current updated data when you're addressing assessment goals and other things in your PIP. However, because we have just had some inconsistencies and wrong data that we've presented, this year we have decided that indicator 3 will not be included in your final summary risk score. So you'll see an NA in your overall risk score. So we still want LEAs to be looking at your data. We want you to be addressing any goals or program improvement decision plans around this data. but as far as overall accountability, you get a pass this year for that in your final risk score. So that was all I had to present with that. If you have any questions around your assessment data or assessments, please shoot me an email. If you have questions around really what your directions are as far as your RDA letter, when we get this new data to you, please send those to Lindsay Cunningham. And that's all I have. Didn't know if Leah or Lindsay, if you had anything else to add, or if there was any other questions out there.
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Tracy. So we will move on to Laura Lee.
Hold on, I've got to quit sharing, stop sharing. Okay.
Hello. I am just so excited to see everyone. I can't see you, but I would like to see you. All right, I'm trying to pull up our UPIPS, just a sec. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, and your presentation is showing.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, we have some exciting news in the world of UPIPS. So first of all, we are getting a major facelift for UPIPS, and I'm ecstatic about it. I have to give lots of credit to Lindsay, Kelsey, Jen, and Emily, who really came together and got this logo, this beautiful new logo, because the online system is getting completely updated. And we're excited to show you a few of the things that we're going to be able to do with the online system. So let me just a sec. I need to move this so I'm facing you. There we go. Okay, so first of all, before we get into that, I want to just talk for a minute about monitoring visits. They've all been canceled for 2019-2020. Please know we are going to take this very slow and gradually as we come back in the fall. So I don't want anyone to be having a heart attack and thinking we're going to contact you as soon as school starts or whatnot. We are going to follow the flow that has been outlined by the state board in terms of the 3 phases in terms of monitoring. So it will come slowly, it will not come quickly, and things will get rescheduled and determined as we come into the next school year. That includes the full monitoring visits as well as the indicator 11 and 13 file reviews. So stay tuned, more to come with all of that. There's also been 1% participation assessment monitoring that was scheduled for this spring. And of course, we're not conducting the assessments. We're also not conducting the monitoring. Tracy Gooley will reach out to you directly to discuss the next steps. But if you have been notified, we just kind of wanted to point out and remind everybody that if you've been notified about students who have a classifying category of specific learning disability or emotional disturbance who are scheduled to participate in the alternate assessment, there is a discrepancy there because specific learning disability and emotional disturbance, you have to rule out the cognitive, significant cognitive disabilities. So whether you were a part of the 1% monitoring or not, I would strongly encourage that if you have a student who is a specific learning disability or emotional disturbance who's planning to take the alternate assessment, that you take a look at those files. That's always a good practice regardless. So just in terms of monitoring, more to come, gradual approach, following in line with the state requirements. Nothing will come unexpectedly. So let's talk about the system because that's the cool stuff. All right, so we are updating the online system. Currently, the system allows us to do file reviews, UPOD interviews, reports, and frankly, there's some great pieces that are really clunky in terms of how the current system works. It's been around for a while. So we've been working with ANLAR, which was formerly known as SPEDSYS, to develop an updated system to improve upon what we are using. So what I'd like to do today is I'm going to just talk through a few things that we are going to have available on the system. We're going to show you a couple of drafts of some things we're thinking about. so that you have a better idea of what this is going to look like. So again, the same items that are currently in the system will still be there. They'll be more user-friendly. For those of you who've done corrections, it's really kind of clunky to get through the corrections part of the current system. That's going to become a lot easier. The new system will also include everything that we do in terms of monitoring visits. So currently, things like observations and parent-student focus groups, the visit schedules, those are all on a Google Doc or done through email or all of those types of things. Those things will no longer be outside the system. It will all be in the system. So everything that happens will be inside. There's also been a problem with you will post a comment on the UPIPS system and we don't know that you've posted a comment, and vice versa. I'll send a message to you and you don't know that I've sent that message. This new system will send prompts. So you will get email prompts if anything is being sent back and forth. And I'm really excited. We are synchronizing with UTREX, which is so awesome because then we can have what is in the system connect with our system. So really exciting things happening with this. And of course the logo, which is not orange. I just want to point that out because we know that Lindsay does not love orange. Okay, so updating draft shots. So if you think about the compliance summary report, currently you just have percentages that go along on the compliance summary report, and it provides for you just a list of things that percentages. Now, what's going to happen with the compliance summary report is that you will be able to do a drop-down menu and you will be able to see all your students that have corrections under each question, which is awesome because then we're going through and it's all connecting together. So again, we'll be connected to UTREX, so those students will be pulled directly over and you'll be able to see everything on one page and complete those corrections and so forth. Again, nudges will be coming as part of this, so email nudges as we do part, you do part, you'll get notices from the system that these things are happening. For those of you who've been involved in a visit over this last year, we've had something similar to this for scheduling, which has been on a Google Doc. This will now all be in the system. So essentially, we will send you a notice. You'll be able to select the schools from UTREX. They'll be in the system. You'll be able to determine who and what right in the system, and we'll be able to make changes there instead of somewhere else. So these are just two examples of some of the changes that are coming. We're thrilled about some of these changes, and we would love to have your input. So because this is as much about you and internal monitoring and how you use the system as it is about our use of the system. So if you have a few minutes and can complete this 4-question survey, we just want to know more about what you like about the current system, what you'd like to see changed about the current system, and in the future, we'll have opportunities to try the system and provide additional feedback. So those options are all there, they're all available, and it's exciting. So I'm thrilled about this, and I'm seeing a few questions that are coming through, but we'll just wait and answer anything that needs to be answered as a group with Brian. So hopefully you have a chance to fill this out, and we look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura Lee. So just to remind all of you, all of these presentations, all of the materials are in the OneDrive folder that I emailed you the link to yesterday. So you can find that presentation and the link to that survey in the OneDrive folder in Laura Lee's presentation. And of course, you could just email her if you had a question about the link as well. So thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Laura Lee, and thank you, UPIPS team, for the work you've done, and ANLAR to update our UPIPS system. When our system was put in place years ago, it was the premier system in the country, and we're going to have the premier system in the country once again. So we're really excited about all the work that the team has done and our partner ANLAR has done to get this, to make improvements in our online system. So that's really exciting. And I don't think I can express in words how much work Tracy has been doing this past 6 months probably, and the past year and a half related to our assessments, all the quirks that we had, all the analyses that have been done over and over and over again. Just want to express my appreciation, my gratitude for all the work that Tracy has done to keep you all informed, and the hours and hours she has been putting in behind the scenes to make sure that special education issues and concerns are brought up by the assessment and accountability team, by data and statistics, and that students with disabilities, their rights related to assessments are considered. And so she's done an enormous amount of work. So thank you, Tracy. So now we are going to have a presentation that Kim and Jenny DeFries have put together. Several of you have asked about a framework for helping your teachers think about best practices for instructional planning during remote instruction. So Kim and Jenny have put together an overview for you, and I will turn it over to you, Kim.
So I'm just gonna, I think we're just going a little out of order. Wasn't going before me, but I can go now.
Oh, sorry. Did I miss that? I did. Yep. Sorry. Hang on.
Okay. Want me to switch back?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
I even have the agenda up right here in front of me. Okay.
No
Sorry.
worries.
Natay is now going to do a legal overview of ESY compensatory education and return and recover services. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to share my screen here.
Okay, we can see it.
Okay, is that all you can see? Hopefully. Okay. As Leah said, we're going to talk about a couple different topics here. I think the tricky thing is, as we've all acknowledged, this is unprecedented, as Esperanza said at the beginning of our meeting today. And so some of this we will continue to just take step by step. And I've tried to build that in. As you all know, Leah's been handling questions about just different things related to compliance and how the pandemic is impacting all of us. And so if you have questions, continue to reach out to her. Jordan and I are in touch and working with her. We're working with our UPIPS team and things like that. We have shared some different resources that were available at the national level, and one of them was a webinar that CASE, or the Council of Special Ed Administrators, Special Education, that they presented that I wasn't a part of, but I did review the slides, and many of you are familiar with Julie Weatherly because she often presents at our law conference. She's one of the big experts across the country in special ed law, and I've always benefited from her wisdom. And I often quote her in trainings that I do because her materials are so great. And so this was a slide that she shared in the CASE webinar that I think is just very important for us to keep focused on right now. I have had calls from some of you, particularly in regards to timelines and evaluation timelines and re-eval and just some tricky situations. And I think her main point is do not be paralyzed by the thought of procedural violations. There may be some procedural violations because of limitations placed on us by the pandemic. But as you just heard Laura Lee say, the UPIPS team is not out to get you. We want to work with folks we're all in this together. And there is the chance that there may be additional guidance from the Department of Ed and OSEP within that moving forward. We just don't know yet. And so don't be paralyzed, but instead focus on what's in this green circle here. Continue to do what so many of you do well. I think all of you do this, but I don't hear about it all the time. But just this idea of compassion, communication, and collaboration. As Esperanza pointed out at the beginning of the day, you know, parents are feeling a lot of uncertainty and worry. And in my experience in working with many of you over the past 4 years here with different situations, so much could be resolved or alleviated by communication. So really that is continually the most important thing. We need to work together to make sure we understand the law that we do have, what's coming from federal and state guidance, but also just communicate and be open with parents as we go along the way so they don't feel in the dark, so they don't feel like they don't know what's going on. So continue to do that. That will make a big difference moving forward. Along those lines, Case kind of stated their 4 priorities, and I thought those were helpful to look at as well. The biggest one is in the orange circle, and that's what we're all doing right now. We're focusing on the safety, health, and welfare of our students and our staff and our community. We're focused on providing FAPE, delivering services to as many students in the best way that we can right now. Documentation is big, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the next couple of slides. But that is something you can control right now. And so I urge you to urge your staff to continue to do that and to keep records in good order, because that will help us make decisions later on. And then they make the point that compliance during the pandemic, the IDA wasn't really built for this. And timelines are just one example of that, right? So we're moving along, doing the best we can with an understanding that we do have this kind of more rigid federal law that wasn't built to address this unprecedented event. Leah did want me to share this with you. Just from a local standpoint, Jordan and I have not seen a huge uptick in dispute resolution. All of our services for dispute resolution are still available. We've had providers doing facilitation over virtual means, and we've had virtual mediations. And so I want you to continue to utilize some of those services if you need them. That said, it's a little slow right now, which I'm not complaining about, but we do anticipate that there may be an uptick later on because everybody nationally is. That said, if you look at Special Ed Connection this week, there was a class complaint filed by an attorney, more so under a civil rights law, alleging issues with the Department of Ed in Hawaii. And they're a unique system because they're much smaller than many of our systems are. I just wanted you to have a little information. It's in very initial phases, so we don't even know what would happen with it. But I think you see some concerns expressed that are common concerns to a lot of families of students with disabilities. Concerned about how we're going to figure out compensatory ed when students return to class, worried about contention and a clear and transparent process, and wanting some criteria for how things are going to be reviewed and how they're going to make decisions. And so those, again, I don't want you to feel fear by seeing this. What I want you to do as a leader is to pull out what are some of the themes or the things that plaintiffs are asking for that I can begin to prepare for in my own LEA to address the needs and concerns of stakeholders. He is going to talk more about this today, so I'm not going to talk a ton about return and recover. I'm also not going to talk a ton about our phase 2 right here that you can see of the stakeholders plan. But I want to set that forth first because for all students, we do have plans and we are being encouraged by leadership and we'll move forward depending how each LEA does it, and doing activities to bridge learning gaps and return and recover using some of that funding that's available through the CARES Act. And so that's one thing I want parents to understand. That's more of a general ed support that will be provided to all students. It can be provided in a more systemic way. It's not so much individualized as an IEP is. That said, just like all general ed support and instruction for students, you would still apply appropriate accommodations and modifications. You would still provide aligned specially designed instruction pieces if that's a necessity. But I want folks to understand that that's going to kind of be the foundation. And so all students are going to need some support in this area. Again, we're in uncharted territory, so we don't completely know what that's going to look like. What's going to help us is data-driven decision making. So you can see some references to using formative assessments. And again, all of this is dependent on when we can gather together in small groups or one-on-one, and we just quite aren't sure when some of those things will resume or begin, because some of them haven't been done in the past. So, like I said earlier, now there is something you can control, and that is collecting data. And I'm not going to read through every bullet. I wanted this more for you as a reference tool. This I borrowed from the case webinar as well. And what I wanted to do is really ground it in the students' IEPs. And so, for example, this third bullet down on the second column, has the student lost any specific skills? That should really be tied to their IEP goals. Are there indications that the student regressed during the closure? Again, we're looking at IEP goals and FAPE as we're considering some of the things we're going to talk about next. I also pulled some of these things actually from some of the model forms that Leah has uploaded into that drive that she shared with you, that are borrowed from different states or different entities who are using some of these questions to guide them in making decisions about return and recover services and about potential comp ed. And so it's this idea that the more that you have clear documentation of what did and did not happen, that will help drive decisions and show that you're making individualized decisions aligned with the student's needs, which if you look at that Department of Ed Hawaii case that's been filed, I think there's a little bit of tension, and that everybody's going to want to see kind of a clear, transparent, systemic approach. But we know that the I in IDA is for individualized. And so we're going to need to use that valuable information that your teachers and other staff have to be able to guide what we're going to do next. We wanted to just make clear, because there's been some misunderstanding nationally. I haven't heard this from any of you necessarily, but in some of the guidance documents, and so I borrowed this from Kansas's guidance document that I believe is also in that shared folder, that some folks are kind of approaching extended school year services, or ESY, as a way to kind of provide comp ed during summer and the break in instruction. And we want to make sure that we're all clear here together, and that our staff are clear that ESY and compensatory services, they're not the same thing. And so I'm just going to review a couple highlights. I know you guys are sharp and do this all the time, so you're probably familiar, but it's just a reminder to remind some of your staff and some of your team. And even for me, I think during these times we kind of joke that the stress and some of what we're going through kind of makes us forget some things we knew. And so as humans, we're gravitating towards things that seem to make sense, but ESY and comp ed, let's not switch those and use them in the same way, because they're different things. So in terms of, I'm going to talk about comp ed first. I borrowed this from Kansas, but we're in agreement with it. The thing that we want to focus on is, and while you're hearing the term return and recover from us, and nationally that's kind of a conversation, is because technically speaking, compensatory services are awarded often through due process hearings or state complaint investigations, when an LEA has not followed the student's IEP and has not provided what they were entitled to. And so it is a remedy to make up for something that should have happened but didn't. We are in unprecedented circumstances where there are some circumstances outside of your control that have prevented you from providing comp ed or from providing services, and that may warrant comp ed in the future. But what we need to pay attention to is, again, that data piece. Where was there interruption in providing IEP services? And then teams need to make individualized determinations whether and to what extent those services may be needed. As you see in the second bullet, they may be necessary when there is a decline in the student's skills that occurred as a result of a student not receiving services. Now, I've bolded some of these things because those are the key things to pay attention to. If you look at case law, it's not just a contention from a parent that student was supposed to receive this service and didn't. I honor that we always need to implement IEPs as much as possible. But the turning point here is that we're looking for whether there was a decline in the student's skills. And that's why when you look at the case law, sometimes the award of compensatory services, it's not minute for minute. We are not going to look at all the minutes of what a student didn't receive and then award that. Instead, it's very much an analysis of, was there a decline in their skills that occurred as a result? And then you as a team would make a decision about what would need to be provided to restore the student to where they would have been. I'm going to go to my next slide because I think it's going to get us there. This first bullet isn't so much compensatory services as it is a charge in our USBE special ed rules and in the IDA regulations that any time you have information that the student's needs may have changed, you need to address that through a review and revision of the IEP. And this has been a huge rule that we've looked at in state complaint investigations over the last 2 years, where parents provided evidence and documentation that students' needs changed and the team didn't address it. And so I just want us to remember that remains in force. And you've probably seen this a little bit or seen it in special ed connection. This is something that attorneys are telling us to pay attention to because especially some kids may have additional physical health needs or mental health needs in addition to some academic needs that we want to address moving forward. This middle bullet, the challenge here is, and as we communicate with parents, to let them know that in order for us to make some data-driven decisions, we need to understand where the student is at, and that will most likely require informal assessments or screenings to figure that out. And so we're going to need to do that once the interruption in services has ended. And so Kansas is leading the way by saying the most appropriate time for IEP teams to determine compensatory education would be when schools return to normal operations next school year. All of that said, in discussions with Leah, we know there are step-by-step where we're living in the unknown here. If things change and you're able to do some of this information gathering this summer, then go ahead and do it. If you're able to have IEP meetings and have some of these determinations, go ahead and do it. But I think that's the important piece, is not telling parents that we're not going to talk about this till next school year, period, or end of explanation, but helping them understand what is comp ed, how do we determine it, and why right now is not the appropriate time, because we aren't finished with the interruption. So we can't totally make a determination. We don't have all the information we need to know where the student is at. And so it's, again, that clear communication. I wanted to remind folks that it does need to be individualized. We can't send a letter home across the board saying, here's your comp ed offering. It's an equitable remedy that's based on facts and individual about the student. That said, you can see that third bullet. You can use some types of structures or formulas, but you still have to show that individualized approach. And I'm telling you this now because we have had a few just issues with LEAs in the past where some different things arose where there was more of a systems issue, and sending home a letter with the same offering or documentation showing that each student was offered the same isn't going to be great. Oh, I was going to say something else, but now I can't remember. So we'll keep it moving. I'll give more information about Comp Ed in the future because it's going to be bigger. So we'll do a speedometer article or more information in USEAM so we can kind of hit on those things. So just ESI 101, you know, ESY 101, you know this. It's beyond the student's normal school year. It's in accordance with their IEP. It's at no cost to parents. And the driver is that it's necessary for them to receive FAPE. And so that's why it's an individualized decision. We can't limit it to services to particular categories of disability or unilaterally limit the type, amount, or duration of these services. And so I want us to remember that, especially this year, because I think a lot of folks are, understandably concerned about their students receiving services during the break. This is the main determinant. It is to maintain student skill on current IEP goals. And it's to ensure that they don't regress so significantly that that level of achievement that they attained prior to an educational break can't be reattained in a reasonable amount of time when they come back. And so again, we're looking at maintaining student skills, that what we know now. It's not meant to address the needs of students who didn't meet their goals. It's not meant to maximize educational benefit. It's not designed to develop new skills. And along those lines, that last bullet, it's not designed to resolve issues created by the pandemic. So that's why I started with talking about return and recover, because that will be key in helping teach some things that we weren't able to. That will be supported by Comp Ed in individualized circumstances. So really, I want teams to still approach ESY in the same way that they have, as much as you can with the data you have about that analysis. We remember that we have a TA document. If you want a copy, it's about 8 or 9 years old. I can send it to you. It's off our website because we're redesigning our website, so we pulled it, but I could send it to you, so reach out. But it's this idea where you're looking back at the data you have. You're also making some predictive analyses to kind of see where you would need to be, what the student would need to get to maintain and not to regress so significantly that it would be too hard to recoup. I wanted to remind you that we are in the 10th Circuit, and so we have a 10th Circuit case that goes beyond kind of what's described in the IDA regulations of what we need to look at for extended school year. It doesn't say you have to analyze all of these things for every student. What the judge said is you need to look at some of these factors as you're making that determination. So as Leah and I discussed this the other day, I always cram too much information in person, as well as you may need to provide it virtually. We just don't know right now. And so it's good to have kind of two plans in place, which we're doing with many things right now to kind of see how you might proceed forward. Last but not least, I just had a few things. I know that you are all working so hard to remain compliant and to work with families. Let's just focus on what we can control and take one step at a time. What we can control is having some plans for different ways of how things might turn out. And I think we've shown as a state and nationwide that, again, you special educators, in my opinion, are excellent problem solvers. You're flexible, you roll with the punches more so than some of my colleagues from law school, I think, do sometimes. So use that skill that you have in thinking of different ways that you could provide things. You can control documentation and data based on what you have. And so I just want to remind us moving forward Do not try to make unilateral decisions, meaning school-only decisions, include parents in communication decisions. Don't make across-the-board decisions or one-size-fits-all approach. I understand that some things may look the same for different groups of kids based on their needs, but you really need to be able to show that you considered these individualized needs. And the way that you're probably sick of hearing this, but the way that we do that often is through issuing written prior notice and making sure that we provide full documentation of how we came to these decisions. So we tackle one thing at a time. As we continue to receive more guidance and information, we'll continue to reach out to you. I'd encourage you to continue to watch Special Ed Connection. They can send you daily emails if you don't get those already. They are constantly updating with articles about special ed compliance as it relates to the pandemic. So that's a really great source, but otherwise reach out to me if you have questions, and I'm here to help. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much, Nate. So as Nate said, we will continue to provide you information about ESY, about Comp Ed, about return and recovery services for Gen Ed and what that means for special education. So please know this is not the end. We are going to keep providing you every bit of information that we have and try to respond to every single question that you have. So now we will turn to Kim and Jenny DeFries. So thank you very much. We can see your presentation, Kim, but we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm going to do this again. Sorry.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, and see
you. And you can see it?
We can see you, not your presentation.
All right, let's try it again. Share.
Go.
We got it all three, hear, see, and presentation? Presentation? Yep. Okay, good. All right. So I'm going to talk about some best practices in supporting online special education. And I'm going to let you know ahead of time. Jenny DeFries and I worked on this and put this together. We have more information than I can give you in 20 minutes. So I'm going to skip around because some of it I know you've already addressed and attended to, but it's kind of sequential, and I wanted it to be in that sequential order so that you had it. Okay, so best practices for effective instruction on online learning formats mirror best practices for effective instruction in classroom settings in brick and mortar. Multiple ways to present content has never been more important. Using explicit instruction in virtual formats, one-on-one groups when available is important. It takes a lot of planning, and being creative and flexible. One of the things that's essential right now for providing students with disabilities services is to help support that Gen Ed instruction that's happening across the Gen Ed setting virtually, so that students have the right types of supports and accommodations. So looking at their individual needs and the task demands throughout their Gen Ed opportunities. Okay, so the things that I'm going to cover, you've already likely handled system readiness to get your infrastructure in place. So the first parts of these slides we're going to kind of skip past because we're well into online learning, and so you've likely attended to this, but there are some tips and tricks in there that you can go to and reference back. We're going to talk mainly about family partnerships and communication, student engagement, and then the instructional delivery and SDI in this presentation. And I want to say your teachers are the experts here right now. They're the experts, not me. If they were not experts pre-COVID, they're probably well-versed in instruction, virtual instruction now. We had kind of a baptism by fire across the state, and we have seen some amazing things. So hats off to all of you for supporting your teachers through this transition, and great things that they're doing. And then just wanted to make sure that we have some resources here so that you can refer back to for teachers who might still be struggling, or maybe some ideas that that you haven't thought about. With that said, we do have a lot of resources that that are in our Google, well, the drive that Leah shared with you. And our team, our USBE team, has been canvassing and looking through different resources to make sure we put the best resources in that folder. So shout out to our staff for doing that, and a shout out to our MTSS team led by Sid Seeger for helping create a module that I took a lot of this information from, and I'll share with you where your teachers can go and participate in some online professional learning activities in relationship to all of this. Okay, so the part that you've likely already addressed is your system readiness considerations with infrastructure, staffing, and staff support. So that's just setting up your technology delivery, or if students don't have access to technology, how are they going to get printed materials, which staff are delivering services, and how are you supporting that staff. Okay, so then we're going to jump ahead here and go into family partnerships and communication. So one of the things that we want to, address is confidentiality and protocols and training on that, making sure that you have a protocol in place for confidentiality and that your staff are trained and understand those different protocols. And then the communication piece, how frequently are you communicating with parents and documenting? Tay talked about the importance of documentation, preferred methods of communication with parents, and then also making sure that we're addressing any access parents may need to interpreters. So the partnerships and the family involvement, we talked about that a little bit earlier in our presentation with Esperanza, and support for families and incorporating data from the home and any data from outside agencies. The family is critical always with supporting students with disabilities, but it's really important that we keep those communications and those connections open right now. I think more than ever. Okay, so again, the protocols that we have to have in place and what training has been provided for families. So how often are your staff communicating with students and families? And it's good to have a point person. So that if we have related service providers involved in that, it would be helpful to families to have a point person so that we are not inundating them with communication. I mean, communication is great, but we have received calls and some concerns from families that they're overwhelmed with how many teachers they have to interact with and how many service providers they have to interact with, and they're just overwhelmed. So thinking about, is there a point person, and how often can your staff communicate amongst each other, and then how that would be relayed to parents in a manner that is digestible for them with everything that they have going on in their homes, with some are working from home and teaching from home. Others have stressors because work is not happening for them. So taking those things into consideration. All right, so one of the things that's just very simple and easy is to help families create a sense of normalcy. And this is pretty basic. Most of you have probably had your teachers attend to this, but just define what is important for the family. Have the family help in that conversation. Help them to create a schedule and ideas for creating student workstations, establish expectations, and then create goals and objectives for the day or for the week. Just some basic things to make sure that you're doing daily. Okay, and then make sure parents understand where they're going to access the information and the lesson content, required assignments, and how that should be done. A tip sheet or a cheat sheet for the parents would be helpful, and these should be individualized. We know that a lot of teachers have put out tip sheets, but sometimes they're not individualized for each student based on what support they have at home, what their technology is like at home, the things that the student are able to access cognitively, those types of demands. So again, here's just some checklist things that you can look at. One of the things that is really helpful is looking at our tiered parent involvement form with MTSS. This was set up for like brick and mortar schools, but if you look at this and kind of you go through this and see like how can we adapt this to an online learning environment. This is super helpful. One of the things to pay attention to is families have different needs, and some parents don't need much help at all, and they're down here at the bottom of our triangle. Some need a little bit more help, and some need intensive help with helping their students to access learning in a virtual format. One of the things that we've seen a requested and a spike in is students with behavior needs that had a lot of prompting and help in school in a virtual format. Some of them are thriving and others are struggling. And so to really work with parents on how to navigate that and what kinds of behavior techniques worked at school and what can be transferred in the home online learning environment has been super helpful to parents where this is a concern. So helping parents understand behavior charts, point cards, and how to keep their students on task and the appropriate amount of screen time, breaks built in. These are really big needs for families right now. And just as some of our behavior kids need that more intensive support at the top of our triangle, parents need some intensive support in supporting them in these virtual learning environments. Okay, so again, this just goes back through this special ed, through the continuous learning instruction, and we borrowed some of this stuff from Washington Office of the Superintendent. So Assistant Superintendent Glenna Gallo, who you all know, shared some stuff with us, and it's in our resource folder that Leah has made accessible to you. And they have some great stuff in here. So I'm going to direct you to that. And those resources are also listed at the end of this presentation. Like I said, we pulled some resources that were some top resources and put them into this presentation so they're easy for you to go back and look at because we know we have a lot of resources in our folder, in our drive. Okay, so one of the things that's key for parents is defining this accessibility piece. And that goes back to the infrastructure that you set up, but really checking back with this and making sure that this is still working and doable. Do they have access to the right type of equipment? Have you introduced any new software throughout the virtual learning environment that parents might need some additional training on? Maybe you've got some new ideas that educators do about what would work and some software for some asynchronous learning that the student would do. Do parents need some brushing up, some training on that? And then making sure that you understand their bandwidth, because there's a lot of issues with bandwidth right now. The parents that do have Wi-Fi have multiple people in the family using the Wi-Fi, and so the bandwidth is not always reliable. And then for students, making sure students can handle the loads that we're putting on them, and what are their physical or sensory needs? Have we adjusted and accommodated for that? And are we working with our gen ed teachers to address those needs? So do they have a full understanding of the sensory needs or accommodations that students might have that are assessing virtual formats? And what other assistive technologies do they need support through? So if a student has some related services or some occupational therapy, or and did we attend to that? Do they have the right type of keyboard at home that they can use? Have we looked at making sure that information is presented with larger font size, those types of things, making sure that we're really paying attention to those accommodations to support their needs. And then student engagement and social emotional is really important right now. So we've had lots of conversations, and I know you guys are all working really hard to keep students engaged, and some students and families are disengaging. We understand that, but some of the strategies to support families are making sure that we have expectations that we've set up, and then looking at our 5 SEL strategies are helpful. So really our students need some structure, but it has to be reasonable. Making sure we're not putting it so structured that the demand on the student and the family is overwhelming. And again, your teachers have been doing a great job with this. It's been a learning curve for everybody. It started out rough in some cases, and then it's getting a lot smoother along the way. So just looking at school climate and expectations, we need to set those same things up for an online learning environment. So establishing our expectations, explicitly teaching them, reinforcing them, and correcting behaviors. And so when we establish expectations and explicitly teach them, we want to make sure that we involve parents in that part. That's very important. Reinforcing expectations for students and correcting behavior errors for students is critical. All right, so using, again, the familiar language and making sure that you really explicitly explain virtual activities to your students and what your expectations are. So here is an example of an activity that your teachers can create if they haven't already created something like this. I thought this was a great example. It talks about what our expectations are for entering an online learning class, what they would be for teacher or whole group instruction, one-on-one instruction, or small group activities. The safe, responsible, and respectful align with the 5 SEL, social emotional learning strategies. So the self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So those are really important things to go over. And we do have great staff that can help you. Casey Dupart is on our staff. She's great to reach out to for social emotional learning needs. If you have teachers that are getting stuck in any of these areas, she is available and happy to help. So making sure also that you're reinforcing and acknowledging appropriate behavior, you know, that old advantage being, you know, where we catch them being good and then we redirect unwanted behavior and just remind students of expectations. But really take the opportunities for praise and catch them doing great things. All right, so for instruction, UDL has never been more important. So that universal design for learning, where we present things in multiple modalities, give students multiple opportunities and ways to express their learning, that is critical right now. We have, like I said, created a professional learning module from MTSS that goes over all the things that I'm talking about in this short 20 minutes in great detail for teachers to participate in an online learning module. We have the resource bank that Leah adds resources to every time we get a really good resource. And one of the things that we think is very important is that we make sure all the educators have access to that. We also have an online newsletter for educators that resources are posted into as well. So on the UDL strategies, looking at what strategies will be used and how we're going to measure and evaluate student access and learning, and then determine progress. One thing about progress monitoring to think about is progress monitoring. The checks for progress monitoring are short and frequent and are aligned to the specially designed instruction or intervention that you're doing. So they don't have to be really burdensome or cumbersome, but you do want to make sure that you're documenting progress, or as Nate talked about, like any type of loss in skills that students may be experiencing during this switch to an online learning format. Okay, so making sure that we're addressing English language learner needs and checking frequently on goals and really checking on their goals and how the students are accessing goals in their making progress toward their goals across settings and how they're accessing their education in the Gen Ed online. Okay, so here's some UDL. CAST has a really great website for Universal Design for Learning, and Iris has some really good modules too if your teachers need some extra help in that area or want to participate in professional learning. So one of the things that I want to jump to really quick, jump here, about considerations for pacing. So one of the things, again, that's critical is supporting the online learning in the Gen Ed setting and looking at how we're pacing our lessons so that we're not, when we teach a lesson in a brick and mortar, we're not up there teaching for the whole class period. We have times where students are actually engaging in the assignment. So to make sure that we're not taking up too much time in front of the student and then assigning things outside that fall on parents to really support, and thinking about especially students in middle school and high school who have multiple teachers that are doing that and then end up with 7-8 hours of homework or things that they need to do outside. So really looking at that pacing. And here's some information about some virtual school practices and how to pace. I'm going to kind of skip here and then go to these examples, looking at synchronous and asynchronous formats. And sorry, jump. So like what you could do in live time and then what you would do in an asynchronous format where students are looking at content when you're not there or working on stuff self-paced. Paying close attention to that so that we don't have so much going on in a synchronous format and then we assign that same amount in asynchronous format, really balancing that so students aren't don't have a load that they're unable to process or might not have the cognitive skills to do that. And making sure that we understand that if students have lots of support in a gen ed classroom or in a special ed classroom and lots of prompting, they're going to need some really big levels of support to stay on task in an online learning format as well. Okay, and then considerations for students who have significant cognitive disabilities or low incidence disability or behavior disorders, needing to take that into account. So some things to look at there is what were you teaching before we moved to home instruction, and what is critical for the student to know. I think those are some of what are the skills that are essential for them to access their education in their other classroom settings, in their gen ed settings. What is critical for them to master or a standard or a concept. Those are things that you might want to focus on. And of those critical skills, how can we make sure that students have access to them? How can we make it accessible to them? And then again, we want to make sure that we don't forget about early learning and instruction or transition. Those needs still need to be addressed. I'm going to let you know that the big idea here, the key that we've talked about throughout USEAM today is communication. Really keeping that communication open. I don't know how to stop my timer. That's my 20 minutes. I have one more slide I'm going to direct you to. This is the resource page. So you can hit on all of these links. Again, these are available in our resource file that Leah has created for you. But they're here if you want to just go back to them for a quick glance in relationship to the slide deck that I gave you. And I know there's a lot of information on there, but it is for information for you so that you have it in one place and you don't have to go and dig through. That was kind of the purpose. I want to direct you just to the bottom really quick, the Open Door Community of Practice. It's regarding our UMTSS distance learning module. So you can hit that link and register for some dates to participate in a virtual community practice. And then our online learning module will be available for teachers to sign up and participate in on May 1st. And it will be posted on our website by our other UMTSS modules. So thank you so much. I know that was a ton of information really quick, but again, I did it in a sequential order so that you could go back and look at it and you'd have it in one place. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim and Jenny, for your help with that. That's really helpful. And hopefully, directors, that will be helpful to you and you can share with your teachers. So I am now going to share some information about the state's plan, the state's three-phase plan to return to instruction. So you all know, and I sent the link in a previous email to the governor's three-phase plan for economic recovery. The State Board of Education has taken that three-phase plan for economic recovery and created, based on the governor's plan, a three-phase plan for educational recovery. Let's see, Kim, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Okay, so This is the three-phase plan that the State Board of Education in their board meeting just last week approved, and it's on our COVID-19 website right on the front page of the State Board of Education. And it's also been, you can find it all over, actually, nationally now. Many other states are using it as a way to frame their thinking about the three phases to school recovery. Utah was one of the first states, a three-phase economic recovery plan. And now we're one of the first states to have an educational recovery plan. And so this is what the state board discussed last week. So I'm just going to scroll through, hit the main points. You saw a couple of the slides in Natay's PowerPoint, but here's the basic graphic that really emphasizes and demonstrates what we're looking for and what we're looking at as far as educational recovery. So right now we're in phase one. We're in the address the essentials phase. And the superintendent has been very clear. If you've seen her on the daily broadcasts, if you've read her interviews in the paper online, or if you've heard her interviews on KSL, she's been very clear. We do not have a new normal because nothing about this is normal. And so in Utah, we're not using that phrase. The governor has also said we're in a new now, but it is not normal. And then once we're able to relax some restrictions and able to come together again in small groups, like both Kim and Natay talked about, maybe school buildings are open again for one-on-one or small group instruction. When we are allowed to do that, we will be moving into phase two, which is the near future. And according to the governor's phase two plan, we would be in phase one, likely based on health department modeling, for 8 to 12 weeks. We've been there for 7, almost 8. So we're hopefully looking at another month or so of phase one and being able to start moving into phase two. And then, according to the governor's plan, we'll be in phase two with, again, consultation with the health departments in phase two for probably 8 to 12 weeks as well, which, if you're doing the math, that takes us to the end of the summer at least. And then we would be able to move into phase three, which is the new future phase. So just really quickly, we'll look at each of the phases. So in phase one, the essential 5. So soft closure. The governor, the superintendent, the State Board of Education, the superintendents all wanted to make sure that learning in Utah continued for students. And you have been doing that amazingly. We have been doing that amazingly. We want to make sure that graduating seniors get the content that they need to transition onto post-high experiences, that they get the credit that they need to be able to move on. We need to maximize opportunities for students to continue to receive meals. So our child nutrition program section at the USBE has been working nonstop to get waivers from the USDA to be able to provide extra supports to school districts and charter schools to provide meal services. And the participation in school breakfast and school lunch and school snacks has increased dramatically in the last month. So your child nutrition directors are working overtime. They're definitely someone that you should thank for their work to keep students eating. It's also a priority of the governor to make sure that education staff stay gainfully employed. And Deputy Superintendent Jones has been providing he provides almost daily updates to business administrators about financing, answering questions about how to keep education staff gainfully employed. And then another really important thing is we sorry, I just had a computer glitch, so I lost you. Hopefully you can still hear me and see my screen. Okay, that was very odd. I live in the boonies in West Jordan, and so I get Wi-Fi glitches, and it appears that that has happened. Okay. So Becky tells me that I am frozen. So I'm going to stop sharing and try to. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, sorry about that. I live in very, very west part of West Jordan, and I only have one choice for Wi-Fi clear out here. And so my Wi-Fi glitches frequently, unfortunately. So hopefully you can hear me again. So now I will share my screen again. Okay. So that's the essential 5. That's phase 1. Thank you for your patience. So now moving to phase 2, which we hope will be coming in next month or so. And transitioning to recovery. So we are going to be determining how federal funds may be used to fund summer learning. And the legislature is actually discussing that today. The legislature in Utah has to accept any federal funding, and so they are deciding today if we're going to accept CARES Act funding. We need to be using formative assessments like both Nate and Becky and Kim talked about to determine learning gaps. And when we are able to get back into school buildings, consider providing opportunities for small group and individual tutoring for general ed and services and tutoring for special ed, and develop and implement digital opportunities for students to. We as special educators need to remember that anything that general education does affects us. And I have tried to be very explicit with all of my general ed partners in the building when we've been having planning meetings, that every decision that general education makes affects special education, because whenever general education chooses to provide opportunities for students, special education has to figure out how to ensure access for students with disabilities, and that students with disabilities are able to make progress related to their IEPs, and if it's core, related to that core instruction. So those are definitely conversations that we need to continue to have related to phase 3. So then in phase 3, come on, one, there we go. Yep. Oh, it does not want to show us phase 3. So, okay, here we go. So I don't know how many of you have seen this, but the NWEA has put together some models to the losses they believe, based on past years, they believe that students will have as a result of school closures. So this particular slide is a national slide. It's not, this is not Utah data. However, this line in the middle on March 16th. So if we look at where students generally were in their trajectory of learning core content, the general trajectory goes to this typical last day, the small dotted line. But because Utah ended our school building access mid-March, NWEA is forecasting that there will be a steep decline, which only makes sense, in student progress. This is decline happens because of the school closure is almost as far down as where third grade started. Look at that. So NWEA is projecting that third graders will lose almost the entire third grade year as a result of school closure. Now in Utah, we're lucky because we have been providing instruction. We didn't shut down closure. And so we're hoping that these results will not be as dramatic as it appears, but still this is the issue that we are going to have to face as a state, and nationally will have to be faced when we get into the end of phase 2 and are ready to move into phase 3. So this is reading. The slide is not quite as dramatic, but still, especially with our third graders, it's about down to where they started originally. Between a third and a halfway down. So as a state, we are going to need to consider how to support students as we return, general ed students, as we return, and we as a special ed community are going to have to figure out how we will help students provide access and make progress on IEP goals and with the return and recover services that Jenna has provided. So this is phase 3, the new future. So again, once social distancing is relaxed, this is what we're looking at, probably in the fall. We're looking at continuing, even though school may be back in session, continuing to provide small group and individual support. As Nate talked about, that's when we would really be looking at compensatory education for those students that are eligible for, that their IEP teams determine are eligible for compensatory education. And then another thing that's really important is to remember that we have learned an enormous amount as a state. That many of us creativity that we have had to employ in the last 6 weeks, and we don't want to lose that. So we want to apply the lessons that we have learned to improving our instruction going forward. So that is the 3-phase plan that the State Board of Education and the superintendent and all of your superintendents and charter directors are working on, that we as the special ed community will need to then figure out for each one of these actions, special education, and what we need to do to ensure students with disabilities have access and can make progress as well. So now I'm going to transition to show you the resources that we have available to be able to help you do that. So first of all, I've been sending you the links, the OneDrive folder that I have created and that all of the staff have been contributing to with resources for you. And we know that there are tons of resources available, and that going through them all to find the resource that you need is time consuming, it's complicated. So one of the things that we've really tried to do is only include the most relevant resources and really tried to organize them and curate them so that it will take you as little time and energy as possible to find what you are looking for and what you need. So I'm just going to share my screen again and show you, just kind of walk you through what is available here. Okay, so you can see that.
Yeah, I can see it.
I can't.
Did you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me? I can see it. Okay, I think you might be froze. If you can hear me. She's coming back. Hang tight.
Okay, can you hear me?
All right. I was just going to take over. You're back. Okay.
Yeah,
Go.
sorry, WebEx completely kicked me out. I had to log back in again.
Okay, you're good.
Okay,
We can
so
see it and hear it.
Can you see the OneDrive folder now?
Yes, can see it and can hear you and can see your cursor moving.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I obviously, could all of you please write to your legislators saying that West Jordan needs better Wi-Fi, because this happens to me about 5 times a day. So anyway, so this because we don't want to overwhelm you. We're taking the time to curate the resources and only providing the very best, most useful resources. So here you can see we have Utah guidance. This is information that either that I have sent you or that the state board or the governor has created. We have information about data privacy when it comes to online learning. We have some research about remote learning. Here in the planning tools and plans folder, we have tools from you that you've shared with me. We have some tools from other states that we have found to be the most helpful of all the tools that have been shared with us. And we have a wonderful PowerPoint here at the bottom from the University of Kansas, which is has the premier research program related to providing online instruction for students with disabilities. So we've got several forms that I've been sending you as you've been asking, serving a student after COVID closure form to talk to parents. We've been, we've got a IEP change list that Kelsey created from an LRP article. An LRP gave us permission to create a form based on an article that they created. So those are in the planning tools and plans. We have a folder, national organizations, that provides tips from all of the national organizations that serve special education. The National Association of State Directors of Special Education, National Association of School Psychologists, the National Council, the Occupational Therapy, the Speech Language Pathology Association, the PBIS Center, the Department of Education. So we have resources here. We have some really good LRP resources as well that we've been pulling out from the daily emails that they send us. And then two things that I really want to point your attention to down here. These two Excel. One of them is just a list of free and or low cost professional development that you and or your teachers and or your paraprofessionals could participate in right now. You have paraprofessionals that you need to keep working. They want something to do. And this is a great time to get them hooked up with some professional learning opportunities. And this entire Excel file has free and or low cost opportunities. And then this Excel file I update almost daily. This has a list of curated websites for resources for providing remote instruction to students with disabilities. And you can sort it by disability type. There are resources for autism, resources for sort it by what type of resource it is, if it's legal or if it's instructional. So as our staff finds new resources, I update this almost daily, but we don't put in anything that isn't that we think that isn't really helpful, because we know you don't have the time to look through it. So hopefully this is a much quicker way for you to find what you need than a Google search, because we have already gone through and determined its utility to you. So that's our OneDrive folder. Hopefully it'll be really helpful, but you don't need to access it if you don't want. If you don't have the time, that's totally fine. We just wanted you to know that it was available. So that of our agenda, and we are really grateful for everything that you're doing. We appreciate everything that you're doing, and we want to be able to respond to all of the questions that you have. I'm responding to the COVID related questions. I want to reiterate what Nate said. Make good decisions based on student needs, based on keeping your staff safe. The standards that you can use to think through if you're doing right by students are the decisions you're making reasonable, and are you making a good faith effort to be compliant and to provide services for students with disabilities. Those are the two most important things. And so we just want to thank you for everything that you're doing. Please remember, any questions you have, send them to my assistant, Brian Christensen, and we'll compile them all, put them together, and I'll send them all out. The answers that are applicable to all LEAs, I'll send them out in an email to all of you next week after we get them all compiled. So thank you very much for all the efforts that you're making in behalf of students with disabilities and your staff. And have a wonderful afternoon. We look forward to the time that we can be together again. So thank you. So it kicked me out again. Is everybody still there?
Still here. Are you there, Leah?
Weird. Yeah, it kicked me out again. Anyway, I just wanted to say goodbye and thank you, but most everybody's left. So
I think we're all good. Thanks, Leah.
okay. Sweet. Well, thanks you guys. Bye.